I'm ready. Yeah, I dropped back. It's great family, so we can read money.
Okay. Maya, thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Really appreciate all the amazing work you put in to make this happen. And also to Harry. I said, Harry, man, you're like an old professor with an emphasis on the old. But I was kidding, because I'm actually like 28, 29 days older than him. We found out we were born like a month apart. But I love Harry's work. He's the kind of science teacher that we should have had when we were young, and we'd have a different world. So much respect to him, and thanks to him, and thanks to all of you for showing up. I really appreciate you coming to listen. I hope what I present will be worthy of your time. So today I gave a talk the other day at Toft Manor on becoming Hydro-Sapiens. It was mostly on water. It was kind of a dry talk for water because there's a lot of technical information. So what I've done is, this is more along the type of workshops and talks I normally do on Goethean science, the natural sciences, and this incorporates the main points of the other talk, the salient points that I wanted to bring out. So I think you're actually going to enjoy it. So I call it the foundation of sacred science. And Goethe said, few people have the imagination for reality. And that's something to think about. Okay, what if Newton asked, how did the apple grow above the earth in the first place? Right? What's all of modern science is based on something falling to the ground, just pure initialistic properties. Nothing about the vibrant life forces that raised it from the ground and gives life, like when we consume it. And I always say, too, at the beginning of the talks, like Socrates, I'm not here to teach you, right? He said, I cannot teach you anything. I can only make you think. So today I hope I can help make you think a bit. And Steiner said, thinking is no more and no less an organ of perception than the eye or ear. Just as the eye perceives colors and the ear sounds, so thinking perceives ideas. So what I'm going to do today is give you some ideas to open up your mind to different concepts and different ways of looking. What Goethe's work and what Steiner based his spiritual science on was creating what they call new organs of cognition by understanding natural processes which become new ways of thinking. And of course the old Descartes, I think therefore I am, right? But modern day, I believe therefore I'm right. But even Descartes was wrong, right? He sort of brought our whole existence down to mere thinking, right? The rest of our experience was gone. This was part of the loss of humanity's connection with nature and the beginning of reductionism in philosophy and science. So this is schooling these days. This is what we get. Conformity. That's why I say new organs of cognition, because people's worldview is an organ of cognition. So you go to somebody like the skeptics, or what I call the pseudo-skeptics, and so basically nothing that's not promoted by academic authority is real. So they're not really skeptics, they just reject anything that doesn't fit the standard paradigm, because they've got their own square. It might be bigger than these, and sometimes smaller. So by creating these new organs of cognition, we can grasp bigger ideas and learn new things. And I want to read this quote by John Taylor Gatto, a brilliant educator. He said, whatever an education is, it should make you a unique individual, not a conformist. It should furnish you with an original spirit with which to tackle the big challenges. It should allow you to find values which will be your roadmap through life. It should make you spiritually rich, a person who loves whatever you are doing, wherever you are, whomever you are with. It should teach you what it is important, how to live and how to die. So higher development of being, this is sort of from Steiner's point of view. So intellect has a significance akin to learning to write during youth. Learning to write is a fundamental skill that must be acquired for practical application. So the ability to write precedes the capacity to learn from written materials. So similar to writing, thinking also follows a developmental path. To achieve higher development, one must engage in training for logical thinking. So once proficient in logical thinking, one can transcend it and engage in heartfelt thinking. So anyway, you think you're thinking. Well, science isn't sure if you are actually thinking. I always wonder, we've had many discussions on this over the years. Are we really thinking, or are we just observing our reactions and imprints in real time because we're sort of incarnated in this body we're trying to figure out? So here's from the scientific literature, right? These are titles and quotes for scientific papers. There is no such thing as conscious thought. Conscious thought, judgment, and volition are illusions. They arise from processes of which we are forever unaware. Nobody knows where brain waves come from. They've searched all through them. Electric waves at the heart of neuroscience have no identifiable source. Mind exists as a field connected to the brain. The mind is a field that exists around the brain. It picks up information from outside the brain and communicates it to the brain in an extremely fast process. So it could be our brains are like, our own encrypted key to the Akashic record, right? Only we can access what's there in immediate sense. Decision-making may be surprisingly unconscious activity. Several seconds before we consciously make a decision, its outcome can be predicted from unconscious activity in the brain. And brain waves synchronize when people interact. The minds of social species are strikingly resonant. Like in groups like this, when we're talking and all this, minds and hearts are actually connecting and vibrating, even if it's not conscious with you. It's within your being. So from this one paper, the brain showed activity that predicted the choices a whopping 7 seconds before the subjects were consciously aware of their decisions. So they give you these tests, like the Benjamin Libet tests, and things coming up where you're going to have to decide something, and they can tell up to 7 seconds before you actually have the chance to make the conscious decision, your brain's already reacting. So this brings up the question, is there free will? And how do we get around this? By thinking about thinking, if we are. But then our hearts are amazing, right? Their hearts are like 5,000 times stronger electromagnetic field than the brain. And they're a torus around the body. So electrophysiological evidence of intuition. This is from the Heart Math Institute. And they did these tests where they had a computer would pick out of thousands of images and put them up on screen. And the people would, basically they'd push the button and the computer would run a random number sequence and pull up a picture. And it could have been something horrible like a car accident or something beautiful like a smiling baby. Nobody knows what was going to come up on it. But the interesting thing is people responded, the hearts responded before the computer picked the pictures, like it knew. So they're saying the heart appears to receive and respond to intuitive information. Significantly greater heart rate deceleration occurred prior to future emotional stimuli compared to calm stimuli. It appears that the heart is involved in the processing and decoding of intuitive information. This study presents compelling evidence that the body's perceptual apparatus is continuously scanning the future. So maybe the brain waves are operating on what the heart's feeling, and we're operating from that. So let's go in a little bit of philosophy. Where did all this come from, the modern view, and where can we correct this? So Plato, there was an ideal realm, right? Ideas are abstract, eternal, and perfect concepts existing independently of the physical world. So there was ideas, the good, the beautiful, whatever. These are perfect ideals that in this realm is only a reflection of that. So knowledge of ideas is certain, unchanging, providing a basis for comprehension of the physical world. The physical world is constantly changing and imperfect, while the world of ideas is unchanging and perfect. So Aristotle was different, right? For Plato, right, there was this ideal realm, this super conscious or heaven, however you want to conceive of it, higher realm. But Aristotle, ideas and concepts are mental constructs formed by abstracting common features from physical world experiences. So like in that view, right, we're born with a blank slate. Just all we know is what we can pick up and patch together and try to figure it out. So you can kind of see where modern science started coming up with this. So ideas are subjective, based on individual observations and experience, not objective or universal. So concepts exist in the mind. Organizing experience is based on patterns observed in the physical world. So the ideas aren't out there like Plato said, they're only in here. Physical world is the primary source of knowledge. Ideas help make sense of our experience with it. So here we can see the big divide. So in Plato's, right, in the dialogues with Socrates, he had this, basically, the paradox of knowledge. You say, well, like if you're searching for virtues, you're searching for wisdom. Well, if you don't know what it is, and you're searching for it, how do you know what it is when you find it? So they had this concept, anamnesis, recollection of ideas which the soul knows from previous existences, especially by means of reasoning. And that doesn't really, previous existences, it doesn't mean past lives, although it could. It was more, our souls came from the ideal realm. So we can actually reconnect with the ideas in our mind through reasoning, through being a rational soul in the Platonic sense. So it's not really the acquisition of new knowledge, it's just that the true knowledge, the true archetypes exist already. We just need to reconnect with them. And we do that through what we call Noesis, the highest type of knowledge. Knowledge of the eternal forms or ideas as archetypes of manifestation. Archetype being, when we look at a plant, it's a type. If we look at all plants, it's archetypes there, which we'll get into in a bit. So cognition, especially through direct, intuitive, self-evident knowledge, pure thought. And we do this by creating organs of cognition that allow us to perceive nature directly. And we use in this the liberal arts. Anybody here familiar with the liberal arts, the Trivium, Quadrivium? I figure there's a few. The Trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So, of course, grammar, you want to use proper grammar. I don't know if they teach it in school anymore. I got some of it when I was young. But that's not what it means. You use proper grammar to describe events and objects in objective reality or true ideations in the mind. And then from there you go to the logic. Then you sort them out, make sure you got your data right, cross-reference things, right? And then from there, then you can express it, wisdom. So it's like the first one, grammar, who, what, where, and when and where. Logic is the why, and rhetoric is the how. And fundamentally, this is input, processing, output. It's a pretty simple process. But we need to do it in such a sense that we're attaining proper knowledge of objective reality as well as our references internally. So we have the quadrivium. That's objective reality. So you have numbers in a real and abstract sense. And what that means is I use the example of like an apple. So you can have 5 apples. Or you can take one apple and you can cut it across its axis and there's the pattern of the 5. There's a 5-pointed star inside. We call that abstract or real. Depends on how you want to think of it, but it's inherent within. So the numbers are more than just simple counting. There's numbers of expression within the archetypal forms of reality and nature. And then geometry, numbers in space, is how those numbers can express themselves, like the pattern in the apple. Music, numbers in time. And cosmology, numbers in space and time. And through the 5 senses, it's hard to see on this slide on the color, but touch, sight, hearing, smell, taste. Through the 5 senses, we can attain all knowledge required to understand nature. With science these days, they've gone off. Everything's coming from machines, right? You need a meter to read it. So this is a 3-4-5 triangle. So there's a mystical sense behind this. This is like the ancient mystery tradition of how you can process reality and advance and reconnecting with the ideal realm, we can say. I thought I'd put this in. It was getting a little far up. I thought, okay, why not? This is the Vajrayana mandala of the Dhyani Buddhas, the meditation Buddhas. And these Buddhas are not like Buddhas that reach enlightenment, they're aspects of ourselves, what they call the skandhas, or aggregates of consciousness. So our first one is form, which is our bodies. The second one, sensation, which is, input. Then third one is cognition. And fourth one is volition. So these are basically the processes of our being. In the center is basically all consciousness, which constitutes our entire being, because consciousness includes our physicality. So what I realize is the liberal arts and the Vajrayana were basically the same thing. It's just that the form is our gateway to the external world, the quadrivium. So we can see the quadrivium is the mandala outside. The liberal arts is like the mandala inside. And of course there's the different symbols for these, the dorje or vajra, the jewel, which is the gift-giving jewel of the expression of reality, the lotus, which is like the meditation seat for cogitation, and basically the visva vajra, the double vajra, which is like the symbol of the accomplishment, the ability to work through the mandala. Now the gateway to the mandala is the first Buddha, Akshobhya, the mirror-like wisdom, and his symbol is the vajra or dorje. And basically that just means that what's external has to reflect what's internal. So in order to process everything properly, everything has to reflect. The reason I bring this up, because in the natural sciences, in my philosophy on the natural sciences, if we look at stuff like, people are like, and we'll get into this as we go along, you'll start to see how this unfolds, smashing atoms and trying to figure out the secrets of the universe by what you're reading on meters, rather than what you can go out and perceive in your higher consciousness by connecting with nature. So if your organ of cognition is basically set up on these principles, then you can directly observe nature without being confused by the incorrect things they taught you in school. And overcome many of those illusions. Because that's what I'm saying, what we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning by Werner Heisenberg. Because basically, modern science is a meter reading science, right? A one-eyed colorblind person can understand all the technical aspects of science, because that's all you need for what to them is reality. The rest of it is all our subjective, which is not. So how does this happen? Metamorphoses of consciousness, according to Steiner, about 15th century, well, we know there was a big change, the Copernican revolution, the advent of the sciences. So before that, pre-15th century, consciousness was experienced thinking as part of nature. Post-15th century, thinking separate from nature is purely subjective experience. So externalization of subjectivity. Proprioceptive sensations of the body's structures projected into objective systems, like the Cartesian coordinate system. So here we see, right, our bodies, we're 3D, right? We've got our up, down, front, back. That's just natural. That's our experience of space. But it's no longer us. That was removed. It used to be the center. Now it's been removed. Steiner said that was one of the gravest errors of humanity's descent beneath matter, was the removal of this 3D proprioceptive spiritual inner nature externally as an inert property of space. But I'll give 20 pounds the first person that can wave their arms around and find 3 dimensions out here. They're not, because space is one dimension. And it operates on projective geometry, which we'll see as we progress on here. So we can blame Galileo a bit, right? He was brilliant. Everybody thinks of Galileo as, with his telescopes, which he sold as a military weapon and got a lifelong gold stipend from Venice and became an armaments master. So from him, the mathematics is the language of nature. It's key to understanding the reality behind natural phenomena. And Galileo's calculations became the basis for mathematical physics. And of course, there is mathematics in nature. We can define it like that, but that doesn't mean that it was worked out on math. It just happens that the expressive geometries are there. Because Goethe said, mathematics has a completely false reputation of yielding infallible conclusions. So there are other ways of conceiving reality than simply doing mathematical analysis of it. And in the Accademia del Cimento, which this is a picture of where they're working with Galileo's hydroscope, it's the contra levitatum maxim. A science based on observation has no right to speak of levity as claiming equal rank with and opposite to gravity. Only that which can be weighed and measured allowed into scientific thought. And interestingly, out of the same Accademia, Contra Spiritus, as I've named it, Giovanni Borelli, the father of biomechanics. So according to him, movements of animals and by extension planetary spheres, everything's purely mechanical. And of course, as we know, becomes based on Newton's mathematics of the apple falling out of the tree. So Galileo, like I said, everybody thinks of him with the telescope and all that, which was some cool stuff, right? The phases of Venus, seeing heliocentrism and what's happening with Jupiter's moons. But his main work was with cannonballs and cannonball trajectories. And this was the birth of inertialistic physics and the international armaments industry. So it revolutionized projectile motion knowledge, enabling precision targeting in warfare, birthed inertialistic science by applying mathematics to predict cannonball motion, impacted warfare technology while contributing to classical mechanics and astronomy, laid the foundation for intertwining science and international arms industry, now ingrained in the military-industrial complex. Modern hadron colliders like CERN smashed Galileo's metamorphosed cannonballs, potentially for secret military projects, and black holes, hypothetical and non-existent, to the metaphorical end trajectory of Galileo's cannonballs, symbols of the soulless mechanistic approach used for war and control. So there are no black holes. They're actually impossible. But that's all science based on gravity and mathematics. That's all they can conceive. So every new discovery they find in space, hey, there's a new aspect to black holes, rather than realizing that it's a plasma universe which actually fits everything. So here's CERN. I call it the temple of the subsensible sciences. Smashing electrical particles underground, the misdirected search for the secrets of the universe in science. So, yeah, what are they doing down there? It's because, when they really start pushing this is when they stopped all the nuclear testing. This is just their metamorphosed direction. And all they're doing, they're still smashing Galileo's cannonballs, right? They haven't advanced beyond that conceptually. And I like this from Eric Fromm. A technological civilization is programmed by the principle that something ought to be done if it is technologically possible. If it is possible to make nuclear weapons, they must be built, even if they destroy us all. And that was Gell-Mann. Gell-Mann was the one that discovered quarks, but his totalitarian principle, everything not forbidden is compulsory. And that's what we're getting out of science. So I thought I'd throw this in because I know everybody likes black holes, but they literally do not exist. And this gentleman down in the lower left here, Professor Pierre-Marie Robitaille, he's done extensive work on this, and his Sky Scholar YouTube channel has probably hundreds at this point of technical sort of lectures and presentations on everything from there's no cosmic microwave background and no Big Bang to no black holes. So something to look into. And was pictures. People, they took a picture of one. No, they didn't. These pictures, as he pointed out, he did a whole imaging class on them. 6 pixels run through like 250,000 algorithms until they got the picture they wanted. That's what that picture is. It's not a picture at all. It's a cartoon. And won't go too deep into this, but science is all based on these little particles, and everything's supposed to be stable, like the Planck, the smallest thing, but it's supposed to be constant, but it's not. It varies. That's why I got Planck walking the Planck, just for fun. Radioactive decay rates, not constant at all. Gravity, gravitational constant's not constant. Speed of light's not constant. So nothing's constant down at that level. They just hope it is. So, like as Rupert Sheldrake pointed out, all of these constants are now constant because they're set by committees. So I met him at a conference a few years ago, and I asked him about Planck. I said, well, did did you do it? He goes, man, I'll tell you that, just working with the light and speed of light and gravity. He said that was so much work going around to all the universities and the standards boards. He said, but I bet if you look into Planck, you'll find the exact same thing. And I did, and it was. On May 20th, 2019, which is around the time I was actually meeting with Rupert, was that they fixed Planck's constant because it comes out differently all the time, so they need their constants. Another common misconception, collapsing the wave. Everybody say the observer effect, right? We look at something, right? It's collapsing the wave, but it's not true at all. They claim the observer effect occurs in quantum mechanics as interpreted through the double slit experiment. This observation of quantum phenomena changes the measured results of the experiment, because we all know this. But the observer effect is caused by the presence of an electronic detector, the observer. So they actually create like either a screen or a field, usually a field, electron counter or photon counter, which potentially is actually creating the particle. So it's not like you look at the experiment and look away. The conscious observer has zero to do with this whatsoever. So this whole, our observation changes the results. In this sense, it's wrong, but we also know through wonderful work of insurance salesmen, Think and Grow Rich. We know that it works, but not in this sense. It's more of you build up in your imagination and you can affect changes in reality, but not just turning back and forth and looking at something like these. So it's just a misconception, not supported by scientific research at all, that the observer collapses the wave. And here's another thing in science, primary and secondary qualities. So what are primary qualities? There's the objective world, right? Extension, size, shape, motion, rest, number, solidity, moving, you move something from here to there. Those are the primary qualities. Secondary qualities, sensations, color, taste, smell, sound, feeling, warmth, cold. So this diagram we see, this is how science interprets for us. I can even see the mouse on there. So if you see down on the bottom, primary qualities, there's no color at all, right? We're looking at a flower. There's just photons are bouncing off of atoms, and they're coming in, and our brain's interpreting it, right? We don't know if we're a brain in a bucket with wires going in, right? And there's this bubble of experience, right? So all of these things, they're not real. Everything that enriches the soul is not real, according to science. So here's your secondary qualities. The beauty of reality, the warmth of your friends, everything you enjoy in life. The secondary qualities, they're just illusions, according to science. They're just like vibrations of molecules being interpreted by your brain, which fell together by chance out of some big bang, which didn't happen because there's no cosmic microwave background and other reasons. Here's another culprit following from Galileo, Immanuel Kant. Anybody familiar with his philosophical? This is the foundation of modern scientific thought. So Immanuel Kant, according to him, human minds cannot fully grasp the concept of a natural purpose. So he had what we call the intellectus ectypus, which means that our intellect can only be built up of pictures we can see, right? This is like Plato, right? We can only abstract things we experience and build up pictures. So we can construct hypothetical pictures. He said there would be an intellectus archetypus, that there is this other realm for where these things must have formed, right? Because he said two things awe me the most, the starry sky above me and the moral law within me, right? So he was like the minister of the separation between, so we could call the divine in a Christian sense for him and what we experience. So he says we could never know this greater intellectus archetypus, the archetype, would directly comprehend the original, erasing the perception, comprehension, existence, distinction. So this approximate knowing the mind of God, but it is forever beyond our finite intellectus ectypus. So this underpins the materialistic scientific paradigm. Still taught in schools today. I got a very good friend who's a very deep Kantian scholar. I've had some wonderful arguments with him. I can't get him around it. Goethe's intuitive judgment. As Goethe said, he was a living example that Immanuel Kant was absolutely wrong, that it's actually our birthright to know the archetypal structure of nature. So he achieved what Kant deemed impossible for the human mind. Traditional scientific methods relying on abstraction and analysis fail to fully grasp nature's complexity and interconnections. Reductionism leads to fragmented, incomplete understanding of nature. Goethe's intuitive judgment combines observation, imagination, and experience for direct cognizance of natural principles. This participatory method allows higher clarity of perception through recognizing nature's interconnectedness and interdependence. So we need our senses, but a lot of people say, well, our senses, right, they can fool us. Yeah, they can. But Goethe said the senses don't deceive, the judgment deceives. And Carl Jung said Goethe's secret was that he was in the grip of the process of archetypal transformation, which has gone on through the centuries. So he was part of this whole awakening within humanity, which is happening all over the world now, but these are some of the roots of them. And I'd like to get some of these ideas out so people understand how we can truly reconnect with nature and from there develop technologies, which we'll discuss more in the second half of the talk. Goethe said, insofar as he makes use of his healthy senses, man himself is the best and most exact scientific instrument possible. The greatest misfortune of modern physics is that its experiments have been set apart from man, as it were. Physics refuses to recognize nature in anything not shown by artificial instruments, and even uses this as a measure of its accomplishments, as we have seen even in previous slides. So we have the subsensible and the supersensible. So certainly there's a quantum reality. We know that they're doing physics. They're doing, I mean, we're using technology that's coming out of these experiments and stuff. This stuff's very real. Of course, all that technology kind of harms us because of the EMFs, and they're using it to enslave us. But other than that, it comes in real handy for things like this. So that's the subsensible, that which we can only see through meters, but beneath the senses, the electrical conceptuality. And then there's a supersensible, what we can perceive through our senses, and then developing our higher senses through these processes, through the Goethean process. What we find is the quantum realm is actually we say it's a distorted, sterile mirror of the higher abilities that we have within ourselves. Like Goethe said, we're the finest scientific instruments that ever were. We just need to develop ourselves in that sense. So we see where you have quantum potential, right? Seed stage, right? So seeds, it's like the immense potential of the seed to grow into a plant. And the valence shell excitation, right? The electrons get excited, they start moving up, to the, getting ready to jump up, and that's like the germination, right? We get the beginning of the plant shooting out of the ground. The stable orbitals, right, then they achieve their stable orbital, that's the vegetative growth, right? The leaves moving up and growing. Quantum coherence, right, there's a coherence between plants with the reproduction as well as the pollinators within the air, right, so this brings us to that. Then quantum superposition, right, this is the seed formation where you have multiple seeds that have the quantum potential, which gives us the superposition, because anything can come out of them, there's much wider range. Like as Enrico Fermi, the great physicist, said, if I could remember the names of these particles, I would have become a botanist. And we'd probably have a better world if he did. So this is Vida Austin's, one of her pictures. She's a friend from New Zealand, so she's given me permission to use what I need of hers to promote, because I think she's one of the greatest researchers in our modern time right now. So this is the archetypal energy in a seed. So basically she puts a sunflower seed in the petri dish for 30 to 60 seconds and then freezes it. And what she gets the pattern of a sunflower. And Hilton Hotema said, let the flowers be an example to expound the mystery. They charm our eyes and make us drowse with their perfume. The flower is born of the seed fallen into the earth. Even so, when our body returns to the substance of the earth from which it is made, the spirit that is held captive is breathed out like a perfume into the higher realm. For the spirit was contained in the body, just as the perfume was contained in the seed. We can see the archetypal was in there. So I won't go too deeply into this, but I want to give you a general idea. So this Goethe's approach to science includes, this is my definition of studying it for like 40 years. I do articles on this for anybody who wants to delve deeper. But in general, we have the process and the method. And the process is a participatory sense of, let's say you're studying a single type of plant, like a sunflower. And you see that how the flower sprouts, comes up, grows its leaves, comes up, forms its flower back into seeds. And when you can actually visualize that entire plant coming and going, right, you start really getting a sense to know the plant, be a participant in its process. Become one with it in your mind, we can say. So then, following that's the method. Then we would take that, well, how does, the method is where you would take the single species and relate it to the greater picture. So how would this like relate to other plants or potentially animals or even the pollinators, you know, the bees or whatever, right? You start looking at the bigger picture. So these are stages in that. So that's what Goethe said. Every process in nature, rightly observed, wakens in us a new organ of cognition. And Victor Schauberger, many of you are quite familiar with, put this in because he was a Goethean without ever really saying it. But he said, totally oblivious, I let the water flow past my searching eyes. And only years later did I become aware that this running water attracts our consciousness magnetically, takes a piece with it, with a force that is so strong that one loses consciousness for a while and involuntarily falls into a deep sleep. And so gradually I began to play with these forces in water, and I gave up this so-called free consciousness and left it to the water for a while. Little by little this game turned into a very serious matter because I saw that it was possible to release my own consciousness from my body and attach it to the water. When I took it back again, the consciousness borrowed from the water told me things that were often very strange. And so the searcher became a researcher who could send his consciousness on expedition, so to speak. In this way, I found out about things the rest of mankind has missed because they do not know that people are able to send their free consciousness everywhere, even where the seeing eye cannot look. So this is similar to Goethe. You don't even have to go unconscious like he did, although that's interesting. He probably went into a trance, right? He was conscious in the water. But it just shows that this is where science, we don't, smashing particles underground and doing math, right? How are you ever going to find the secrets of reality that way? All we know is what happens when you break stuff up. So what Goethe did is, following the process and then the method, he was able to conceive that there is only one plant. He called it the Earthlands, the vegetative surface of the planet. So this is what Rudolf Steiner says about this. Goethe does not flee from reality in order to create an abstract world of thoughts which has nothing in common with reality. No, he goes deeper into reality, into its constant changes, its becoming and moving, in order to find the immutable laws. He confronts the individual phenomenon in order to see the archetype in that individual. Thus, there arose in his mind the archetypal plant and the archetypal animal, which are nothing other than the idea of the animal, the idea of the plant. These are no empty general concepts which belong to some gray theory. They are the essential bases of organisms, which are rich, concrete content, full of life and clarity. So in essence, these ideas, they're from what we call Plato's ideal realm. But to Goethe, it wasn't an immutably fixed realm like it was. Whereas us as participants are part of the conscious evolution of this because we're all intertwined, right? We're symbiotic with the plant world. We need the plants and the plants need us, interchange of gases and energies. So basically, I'll just do a little sort of run through in meditation and show you where this can actually lead. So seeing the whole of a plant. So at no point in our consciousness right now, what we call a discursive waking consciousness, can we observe the whole of a plant. You just say, oh, well, that's a plant. Great. We can identify a plant as a plant, even though there are diverse types. So in order, like I was saying earlier, in order to see the whole of a plant, we have to be able to put all these stages in our mind together. And what this does is it takes us out of our pointed consciousness temporal zone and puts us into plants. They have a whole different time frame working in the etheric. So what we do is, basically, this is a way to develop our eye of the spirit. The spirit can see the whole of the plant. So when you look at a plant, you know what it was. So for me, as I have over the years and developed this, like when I come places like come to England, I'm constantly looking at all the plants, everything around. So I do in some of my lectures, I'll put up pictures of jungles with animals in them and stuff, and I say, can anybody name the species? Yeah, giraffe, gorilla. I go, not one person names the plants. We have what we call plant blindness. And this is something I'd like to see people overcome. I'm sure there's a few gardeners here that don't have it. So anyway, so we can conceive the whole of a plant, and then we think of Goethe, like he was talking to Schiller, and he was explaining this Earthlands, archetypal plant, and Schiller's saying, yeah, that's just an idea. And Goethe said, yeah, well, I can see ideas with the eye of the spirit, right? This is the way to develop. So this is just a way of thinking of meditating. Here's the plant family. This is all the types of plants on the planet today, which are all expressions of the Earthlanze. They say it's just one plant. We're not going to go through all these, but it's a cognizing archetypal plant is seen through all plant families as one planetary gesture of floral life. And then we can look at plants going back into the past, into the basically Paleozoic here. That's as far back as this chart goes. Devonian, Carboniferous, Permian, Mesozoic, that was the age of dinosaurs, and then Cenozoic was everything that happened just before us. We're the Quaternary. So if we look at the way these plants grow, so we see all these different plants. Some of them died out, but right here, about the middle of the Jurassic, the beginning of the middle of the so-called age of dinosaurs, we start getting the flowering plants. Those are these, and of course they're the most wide. So here's conifers, which have existed from way back when, just various other plants. Ginkgos, it's a single species which has lasted all through without much metamorphoses. So what's interesting is right when the flowering plants started, that's when the pollinators, by chance, according to science, they got these millions of years over here, hundreds of millions of years. Well, how do you know that stuff? So these are actually human-made objects that have been found in, like, supposedly 300-million-year-old coal beds. There's quite a number of these around the world. They've even found, like, anatomically modern humans and ancient coal beds in Italy. So these hundreds of millions of years, you have to bring those into question for sure. Well, it's interesting if you look at like Michael Cremo's work, I can't think of the name of his book right now, on all the ancient artifacts like this. He's done an extensive book on it, which I read, and I can't think of the name right now. But to him, right, he's Bhaktivedanta Trust, right? He's a Vedic scholar, and to him, in their religion, hundreds of millions of years, this verifies that humans been here for hundreds of millions of years, right? So he uses this evidence for that. And what I love is the biblical creationists, they use the exact same evidence to prove that it's a young earth, and it fits all of theirs. So you can make the evidence fit whatever you want, but I'm doubtful of the hundreds of millions of years. And this is a representation of plants. So it's a graphic representation of 3D of plants coming and going through over time. And we'll see, so there's 300 million years. This is still in the the Paleozoic, and then we get into the Mesozoic here, and we start coming up to the middle of Jurassic, and you'll see here, so these are the flowering plants as they start occurring. So what I liked about this is a beautiful way to think of it, because we're thinking there is only one plant, the vegetative surface of the planet, and if we look at it in this representation from the beginning of time on our planet, it actually is a giant flower, right? So there's different ways of conceiving this, but so where is the idea, right? If it's an idea, where's this ideal realm at? Cosmological botany. This is an extension and outgrowth of some of the researchers in the biodynamic field. So, yeah, what we see here is the, my pointer's working again. So here, Earth is in the center, sun's going around, this is the moon, and this is Mercury. So this is, over time, this is the path that Mercury takes in relationship to Earth, what we view. And this is what the archetypal pattern of the monocotyledons, right? We have 3 sepals and 3 petals on there as the basic. Of course, it gets more complex, but these are the fundamental archetypes. And here's Earth and Venus going around the sun. That makes a 5-pointed star, and that's the dicotyledons. So here we see Mercury in like the bindweeds, like morning glories and things. And as we get out, like the umbellifers, you start seeing the outer planets. You start drawing out these. So what's interesting is this operates as though Earth is the center, the archetypal forms of plants. So here's, just in general, this just shows the archetypal plant is actually formed by different planetary actions. So basically grasses, they're the sun, obviously with the moon being the roots. Water lilies, the moon. The bindweeds, they're Mercury. And it's interesting because you actually get Mercury-like psychedelic compounds. If you think Mercury, message of the gods. Buttercups, Venus, beauty. Roses, to Goethe, that was the archetypal perfect sort of flower or plant for his studies. And I said the umbellifers, the outer planets, start drawing them out, and then basically the composites, which are the outer planets, because these are not like a daisy or a sunflower. It's not a single flower. Every petal is a flower on those. So it's just a way of kind of connecting to the cosmos, these bigger things. And this is where we start using some of the mathematics that we use in our bioarchitecture and bioharmonic technologies. So this is Lawrence Edwards' work here in England. And what he would do is he was measuring tree buds over time. Get up on ladders and measuring them with micrometers and finding that they basically changed with the moon and planetary bodies. Specific tree or flower changes the form of its buds in the rhythm of lunar alignment with a specific body. Oak and Mars, beech with Saturn, birch with Venus. So this cosmological botany shows from first mathematical principles a successful description of biological form. This implies DNA cannot alone be the propagator of living form, and random processes alone cannot drive evolution. So it's just a graph just showing the conjunction and oppositions is when the buds come into proper shape. What's interesting is he had one tree by his house that the buds weren't changing shape, and he was really puzzled by it. And then he realized there was a big transformer, power transformer on a pole, and the vibrations for that were actually cutting out the cosmic vibrations and distorting it. So think about that with all the electricity on the planet. What are we actually missing here? And over on the right is just a general idea, concept, ethereal space of path curved surfaces. So basically you have multiple curves are forming these patterns. And this is what we use as path curve geometry, which we'll get into a little bit more in simple terms. We're not going to, but they're basically, they solve the nature of space. Space isn't 3D. We can interpret space as 3D. We can interpret things in 3D, but like I say, where's the 3 dimensions? There's 1 dimension, space. That's why they call it space. Anything else is abstract. So if the planets and the stars, everything, if they're making these patterns on Earth, our star is conscious. This is Greg Matloff's work. He's a professor. Universe is in some sense conscious, and a portion of stellar motion is volitional. So he's saying basically that there's a protofield. So young stars are working in a certain way, and as soon as the stars start getting spectral lines of elements, they start moving differently, what they call Parenago's discontinuity. And it's because of this, and with the scientists stuck on their Newton gravity-only model, that they came up with nonsense like dark matter, because they had to fill in the gaps that didn't work their model. It works with the electric universe model, but Matloff is saying that they're conscious, and that there's this proto-conscious field, and when those heavier elements start forming in the star, it connects to these fields, and they become volitional themselves. And this would tie in with Olaf Stapledon's great book on Star Maker, if anybody's read that. Came out in 46, in case you missed it. But it was everybody should read that book. It was an inspiration for him. So here's the sun. Is the sun conscious? Is it affecting us? These pictures, which I'm sure many of you have seen pictures like these are basically extreme ultraviolet pictures of the sun taken in special filters. So these are the emission bands. So these are ionized iron of different types, 171 angstroms, which is 17.1 nanometers, etc. So what we're looking at is here, so dynamics of poliomorbidity in Riga between 27 and 59 and changes to solar activity and Wolf numbers, which is sunspot count. So basically, you're looking at viral diseases and solar activity. This is Soviet heliobiology research. Dynamics of morbidity with polio and variations of planetary index of magnetic disturbance, because the sun affects the magnetic disturbance. So you find these correlations. Oh, here's same with scarlet fever in Leningrad, and scarlet fever depending on what geographic latitude. And down at the bottom, I don't know if you can see it, but ultraviolet wavelengths, which is the extreme ultraviolet, are from 400 nanometers to 10 nanometers. Most viruses, we'll put in quotes, vary in diameter from 400 nanometers to 20 nanometers. So when viral diseases happened on Earth in the past, the disease waves always happened when the sun was at very active ranges of the extreme ultraviolet and X-ray, which is just on the other side of these numbers here. So we're integrated into what the sun is doing. And mysteriously, solar activity found to influence behavior of radioactive materials on Earth. So decay rates aren't constant. Again, another of the supposed constants of science. They fluctuate with solar core rotations, 33-day pattern. Then there's also annual fluctuations based on our orbit and position because we come closer and further. And so they're looking at potentially to predict solar flares and things. But what they found is during 2006, solar flare, Purdue researchers found the decay rate of a medical isotope dropped during the solar flare significantly. The decline started before the flare did. So the core of our beings and all the material around us is changing constantly with what's happening on the sun. And these are just various scientific papers, possible effect of space weather factors on various physiological systems of the human organism. So of course the stuff's going to affect us. Schumann resonance is plausible biophysical mechanism for the human health effects of solar geomagnetic activity. Human intelligence, the brain, an electromagnetic system synchronized by the Schumann resonance signal, which is modified by solar activity. So Giorgio Picardi, the chemist of the sun, because of these variabilities, in medical and pharmaceutical and chemical industry, they would come up with these problems where reactions wouldn't work even after putting together all the expensive ingredients, and they couldn't figure it out because they had to do certain timings on things. So Picardi, he was the chemistry chair at the University of Florence in the 50s and 60s. So he did, over 10 years of experiments, correlation between different chemical tests and Wolf numbers. So what they did is basically test P, normal water under copper, like a Faraday cage. Test F, activated water, open air. Activated water is just a lowered surface tension with vacuum balls filled with mercury, which Soviets developed for descaling boilers in industry. And test D, activated water under copper. So basically, F is open air, D and P are under copper. So, but what we find is D and F, they're both reacting. So it didn't matter if the experiment was done inside or outside a Faraday cage, it was still reacting. And I didn't put all my slides in because these are from another presentation, but they've actually done radioactive decay rate experiments in Faraday cages, and it's still happening there. So the Faraday cage it might block out kind of general EMFs, but there's some substrate, we call it the ether, maybe. Who knows what's actually the mechanism, but there is a mechanism there which is doing it. And what's interesting here is, so these are solar flares on chemical P, so just to show a different test. But this is blood sedimentation correlated against the P test. So what they were doing is they were basically taking chicken blood and seeing how long it took to coagulate and graph it while they were doing all this. They did these experiments all around the world for like over a decade. Amazing amount of research. So it shows even our blood is reacting to the solar and geomagnetic activity. And what's interesting is he found then this is through the year, this is 9 years of the best data correlated together to see. And this low point here is March 21st, the March equinox. So without going too much into the details, it takes a while to think out, but I'll show you in general. Let's write that one. Oh, there we go. Solar system. So here's the sun. This is a pop out here. So we're coming up around. So when Earth is coming up here, right here, this is the view from the galactic center. When Earth is right there, that's the March equinox. So it's like when Earth is going directly at the galactic center is sort of the most stable point in all of the experimentation that they did over the years. So we're connected to the galactic center as well. And it's funny these days on YouTube, right? You get on and you get interviewed and you talk about this stuff and you read the comments, go, oh dear, that guy thinks there's space. He didn't learn about the dome yet. But I did learn about that, but that's why I talk about this stuff. Response in the living. So what is matter even, right? Jagadish Chandra Bose, he did a lot of great work with plant activities and plant response. But I always like this here, the response in the living and non-living. So what he did, they have what they call the drug response curve. So A, this is animal, P is plant, M is metal. So, because what he found is he was making these little, basically gold and platinum springs and things for measuring plant response, trying like amplifying their motions like millions of times so he could study the effects of various phenomena upon them. But what he found is when he was like drugging them, he was getting anomalous responses. So this is what happens, this is what we call a drug response curve. So this is like with ether or chloroform, this is what it's using. You see right the point when it happened on animal, like a steak, right, with running the current through into an oscilloscope. That's basically what's happening. Bit of plant tissue. Here's the metal. The metal is responding. So as he said, living response in all of its diverse manifestations is found to be only a repetition of responses seen in the inorganic. Nowhere in the entire range of these response phenomena, inclusive as that is of metals, plants, and animals, do we detect any breach of continuity. So where does life actually start in all of this? Here's Lily Kalisko's work, cosmic crystallization. So she set out, she was a significant associate of Steiner's, and she set out to see if there's any truth to the old alchemical conceptualities, gold in the sun, silver in the moon, Mars, iron, Mercury, Jupiter, tin, Venus, copper, and Saturn, lead. And she did about 40 years of experiments, the Kalisko method of crystallization. So she would take a metallic salt like gold chloride or silver nitrate, and she would put it into a little petri dish of water, and then take a blotter paper, put it into a cylinder, put a clip on it, and stick it in there. And she was doing these days and nights and tracking them during all these different astronomical events, conjunctions, oppositions. Steiner said, so long as the substances are in a solid state, they are subject to the forces of Earth, but as soon as they enter the liquid state, planetary forces come into play. So here we see gold in the sun. Basically, this is during a solar eclipse. So this is a standard gold chromatogram. She didn't have the money to print in color. She apologized for it in her book. But this gives you, so this is before, during, and after a solar eclipse. And you can see when the moon's in front of the sun loses its connection to gold. The crystallizations are ill-formed. And this is with silver. Silver by day, no matter how you supersaturate the solution, the blotter paper will only rise up to a line like that. As soon as the sun goes down, this secondary portion comes up. It's very fascinating. So what Kalisko did is she did gold and silver. So here's gold and silver mixed. And they come up during the day. They form this line here, as we see. But then during a solar eclipse, what happens? When the moon goes in front of the sun loses its potency, and the silver takes over and comes up. So I just put all those into one thing here so you can kind of get those visually. Silver nitrate by day, gold chloride and silver nitrate by day. Silver nitrate by night, gold chloride and silver nitrate during the totality of an eclipse. So what she's showing is there's a direct connection between all this. But what it's basically doing is we're talking about the heliocentric and the geocentric. Well, which one is it, right? You know, there's this big change in consciousness with the Copernican revolution and, you know, Kepler's work and Galileo, you know, showing the phases of Venus, that it had to be potentially the geocentric model. So there's a certain reality to it. We call it the universe of measurement, you know, linear extension to infinity. So this is basically the organ of cognition of kind of modern person. You know, adrift in space, acentric. We're nowhere, right? We're insignificant. Pay your taxes, because we're going to do the best we can when we get that money off you. Lowest common denominator, complex celestial motions reduced to simple ellipses, right? So it's removal from direct experience, energetic disassociation from cosmos, and I call it the situs of the chronarchy, you know, ruled by time. You know, But then we have the geocentric universe, which is what we just saw from Kalisko and the cosmological botany. This is what the life body is actually responding to. So that's a universe of sight and perspective. It's a universe of direct experience. When you die and your life flashes before your eyes and you go into the spirit world, what do you take with you? You know, some scientist told you, or what you experience. Has anybody actually ever experienced going around the sun, or do they experience the sun rising in the east? So there's a reality to it, right? It's an experiential reality. If we're more than just meat puppets here to pay taxes. So this is where we get cosmological botany, the planet-metal reactions, sundials, alignments, you know, all these ancient sites. Why are they all lined up with the cosmos? What did they know? So this is organic time. So we can synthesize these together. The anthropocentric universe, alchemy of space, the power of will and intent. So our imagination is a tool of knowledge, right? We use our imagination to build the pictures, like of the earthlons, you know, the different species, these different natural processes, like Schauberger did with water. So as I said, ideations are the cognitive organs. So both the heliocentric and the geocentric are real. So heliocentric's like the bones, or like a computer with no power. Right? We know we have a skeleton in there, but to access it's a rather painful thing. So in a sense, it's abstract to our general experience, unless we've had an accident or we studied something in school about biology and anatomy. But what do you have on top? We have this magic fleshy stuff that's reacting to the geocentric realm. So they're both real. So the heliocentric, that's like a computer with no power, and the geocentric, that's like the power being fed by the positions and the cosmic radiations. So this is transcension of subjective, objective apparency, and the gateway to the higher spheres, like in Steiner's work. So we're talking about the secondary qualities. So kind of from the anthroposophical perspective, they have what they call the second hierarchy, right? They've got the spiritual hierarchies of, first seraphim, cherubim, the thrones. Then the second here, the Kyriotutes, the dynamics, and the exousiae. The third is in archangels and angels. And below that, then we have the etheric forces, which are the formative forces and processes around us. I usually don't talk about this stuff because I don't consciously connect to it and experience it, all of it. Although I have started reaching this stage via meditating through the cosmological botany. So I put this in because this is sort of, the secondary qualities. Well, science tells us everything's an illusion, right? Everything that enriches our soul is an illusion. So what is it? Well, perhaps this reality around us is a gift of a higher spiritual world, to give us an opportunity to grow ourselves and reach out and do that. So anyway, these are just some of the ideas. I think I'll let you guys let that sink in for a bit, and we'll take a brief intermission. Okay. Hey, thanks for staying awake. To me, I call it symbolic performance art. I'm just having fun doing this, and I hope you learned something from it and had some fun thinking about it. Because we're made of light, scientific evidence. Again, here's some more scientific papers in science journalism. Biophoton emission, right? We're emitting biophotons. And what's kind of interesting is actually when you're ill, you're emitting more biophotons, right? The system's releasing them. But anyway, we know that DNA is the source of the biophotons, and DNA is a fractal antenna in electromagnetic fields. And we have optical communication channels in our brain, right? You're using these biophotons. So the light that powers you is the same light that powers the sun and stars, the lightning and lightning bugs, and the cosmos in its entirety. We are electroalchemical beings bathed in an electrically connected reality. So yeah, light, we have to see, right? Cerebral alternation. A lot of you have seen these pictures. You look at it, well, which direction is it going? You know, cube in 3 dimensions. So if you look at it, after a while, the perspective changes. And it looks a little distorted on your screen, but there's other screens up around. So what you find in this, and there's many pictures like this, is if you stare at it long enough, you find out it switches back and forth. Cerebral alternation. And it's about, for me, it's about 7-8 seconds, right? If I do it, if you're in a calm state of mind, and you can actually tell if your mind is balanced. It's a good thing. So, you know, it's the exchange between hemispheres of the brain. So that there's this rhythmic activity, like Harry was talking about, like the nostrils switching back and forth, right? And the way that they potentially help balance up in the brain. That's what these do. And also, too, I was thinking when he was talking about that, the nostril breathing, that's what Dinshaw Gadiali had in his color spectrochrome, that, right, certain charts when your nose was doing one thing or the other is when you use certain color in your therapies. So just something interesting to think about when you see pictures like this. Because we have a visual ray. There's a ray that comes out of our eyes, right? It's kind of an inner light that emanates from us. And of course, we all know this, like Rupert Sheldrake's work on, people can sense people stare. We've all experienced that. So it's not a physical beam, but it's more like a spiritual or energetic form that comes out of the eye. And this is essential to what we see. So our peripheral vision kind of connects everything. You know, we're taking so much information, we can't see it. What we actually see and focus on and are conscious of is what our visual ray is touching. And of course, this goes back to Empedocles and others, but the emission theory of vision, right, that we see because this ray streams out of our eyes. You know, and then there's intromission that's coming in. Well, it's a bit of both, really, I would think. But modern scientific theory only takes the one where it's coming in because we're just brains in a bucket with electrons coming in that we interpret according to their theories on that. But many people in the past thought that they did. And mysterious rays from human eyes move solenoid, Popular Science, January 1922. Type of apparatus used in recent experiments. So here, this Dr. Ross, he was actually measuring the force with this little solenoid device that he did. Yeah, what happened to that research? That was great. I always love these old little things you find out. And what was Tesla saying? Tremendous new power, soon to be unleashed. Tesla said, I expect to photograph thoughts. In 1893, while engaged in certain investigations, I became convinced that a definite image formed in thought must by reflex action produce a corresponding image on the retina, which might be readable by a suitable apparatus. Now, if it be true that a thought reflects an image on the retina, It is a mere question of illuminating the same property and taking photographs and then using the ordinary methods which are available to project the image on a screen. If this can be done successfully, then the objects imagined by a person would be clearly reflected on the screen as they are formed, and in this way, every thought of the individual could be read. Our minds would then be, indeed, like open books. So even Tesla knew about that. Activating the visual ray. Here's a great book. I had this back when I was in my 20s, back in the 70s. The Psionic Generator Pattern Book. And I would make these patterns and I would hang them up in my room, which everything was closed, there's no drafts. And you stare at one side, it'll spin one way, and you stare at the other side, you'll spin the other way. And I'd set up like 2 of them and stare in the middle and get them like counter-rotating. At the time, I didn't know about the visual ray. I was just thinking, well, psionic energy, but I learned later about that. So there's ways of actually testing this yourself, that you have this beam coming out of your eye. And we can use it to move clouds. Of course, it's great to make translators and do all sorts of work, but we can interact. And I've done this, go out and stand in bare feet on ground and stare at clouds and just draw them in. Sometimes you almost get faint. You can pull so much energy in, or whether it's coming in or going out, whichever way it's flowing, because people have different opinions on that. But we can certainly affect the clouds by doing this. And the pinhole camera, I think people are probably familiar with this. Standard, it's actually quite interesting, the pinhole camera, because the eye doesn't do it. The pinhole acts one way, but if you had a drop of water there, it doesn't work, right? The drop of water works more like our eye, seeing straight through. So it doesn't, our eye is not like the pinhole camera and being reinterpreted according to the electron theory of the modern scientist. The reason I'm bringing this up is because my associate Juan Schlosser, the bioarchitect I work with at BioArc, whose work we're going to be getting into here shortly, these are pinhole camera experiments he did with his father Adolfo, who was an Austrian artist. So basically they made these bowls, coated them with photographic material, and put a card with a pinhole over it. What's interesting is the images appeared all the way to 90 degrees from the pinhole, refuting both photon and ray theories. So this is like the light ether, that in a not too detailed sense, we can start seeing how every image is available at every point in space in the light ether. In a holographic or fractal sense, we can think. And these simple experiments proved it. People say, well, maybe light could get in and slide on down. I go, no, I talked to Juan the way they set it up. He said, there's no way. He said that actually happened. And I've got a lot more of these. This is just to show you that these modern concepts of particles, waves, sure light's a wave, a wave of what, right? A wave is a verb, not a noun, when you think of it. You can say, well, there's a wave coming, right, but a wave of water properly. So, thinking of vibration, Steiner said, neither tone, nor warmth, nor light, nor electricity are vibrations, any more than a horse is a sum of its gallop paces. So what are these forces, right? It's not just vibrations. As modern science, everything's just vibration, all lined up like nice little soldiers in a line from 0 to infinity with their little areas of influence. So we'll get into Goethe's work a bit. As to what I have done as a poet, I take no pride in it, but that in my century I am the only person who knows the truth in the difficult science of colors. Of that, I say, I am not a little proud, and here I have a consciousness of a superiority to many. What was he talking about? What could he know about color that made him feel superior because nobody could understand it? Well, here's modern science, misdirected perspectives of the discursive paradigm. You see these things on Facebook and stuff. Colors really don't exist. There are no colors. Apples and fire trucks are not red. The sky and the sea are not blue, and there is no objective black or white. The universe has light in different wavelengths, and a color vision depends on how our brain perceives light at different wavelengths. Technically, colors are an illusion created by your brain. Secondary qualities, right? So I consider this stuff nonsense. And here's some more nonsense. Newton's nonsense, that there's 7 colors in light. Now, basically on every table we've put out, I think you see there's like a prism and some cards, which you're welcome to play with, and I'm going to show you what they are in a minute, because experience is a wonderful teacher. Because we all grew up in this. I mean, we can't blame Pink Floyd, right? Dark Side of the Moon. They're musicians. They don't know this stuff. But universities should know, right? Here's standard electromagnetic spectrum. Everything's lined up by mere numbers. So what's missing? You know, that's why I ask friends, what isn't on the electromagnetic spectrum, or what aren't? Life and consciousness. So here's Encyclopedia Britannica. All right, white light goes in, and you find these university books, it's everywhere. Everybody's seen this stuff. It must be true. I used to believe it. But then I started experimenting with prisms. So here's light through a prism. No green ever comes out of a prism. The green always forms when the yellow and blue bands come together. Of course, these colors are a bit distorted from here. So it's basically violet, blue, and red, yellow. And the green occurs where they connect in the middle. On my screen, it looks proper color, but here it's kind of slight distortions. So this is from Goethe's book, The Farbenlehre, Color Theory, where he actually reproduced all of Newton's experiments and more to show. So this is what's happening in a prism. The light's coming through a slit. Where the dark and the light come together, you get these two bands, depending on which way the prism's situated. So there's your blue-violet and your red-yellow. They come together and make green. So Newton took this section here because the colors looked the most balanced. So here's the basis of the electromagnetic spectrum. None of this stuff counts. But what happens if you, rather than running light through a slit, you run it around an object? Well, you produce a secondary spectrum, or inverse spectrum with magenta in the middle. You know, yellow, red, magenta, violet, blue. So what is black have these colors, white has these colors? There is no color in light. Color forms when light and darkness come together. Now these cards you have on the table, and I've got a set here, so I'll pick these up and show you how to use them. Feel free to open them up and check them out. You pick out any, but I mean, there's a number of them. So these are from a book called The Rediscovery of Color by Heinrich Proskauer. But basically, you take a card like this. And what you do is you have to hold the prism. It takes a little bit. So I'm looking down like this, and I'm looking at the card out here. And I can see something like this. In fact, there is probably a card more like this out there. And so go ahead and play around, pass it around. It'll take a little bit. Once you get it, and it's not hard. But play around with that through the rest of the talk. Have some fun doing it. But basically what you see is, you'll see like a blue, violet, blue, red, yellow, and where they come together you get a green, and ditto. Let me see which card. There is one card that's actually like this in there. So you can just kind of slide through those and find it. But check out all the cards. All of them, even the redshift cards. There's a number of complex experiments which... Yeah, there's this card, which is very similar to this, so you can experiment with that one to get the exact same concept and see. And what you experience by doing this, I mean, this is what... I always believed that Newton stuff, and somebody turned this on to me, and I always had prisms. I had this big prism I had since I was a child. So I get it out, and I go, how did I miss that, right? It's just so obvious once you get it, that the color forms where darkness and light come together. So there's the two sides put together. So this is Goethe's color theory, or color circle. So we say, Goethean research into color and light itself points to a domain in the non-physical, to the world of the archetype, ranged above the processes of perception. Here, thinking alone as an active spiritual eye can form the bridge, right? It's like the whole of the plant. You can't see the whole of the plant at once. If you want to see the whole of the color circle, you need to study both sides and imagine and understand what this represents as an archetype form. Anyway, what's interesting, here we have biophotons, which we mentioned earlier. So these are biophotons photographed through a dark field somatoscope, which is a high-resolution dark field microscope. And basically, they're getting the photons in water, and they're basically hexagonal, right? They're six-sided, just like light. So here we have a relationship between light and water. And here I've just basically made them into animation so you can kind of see them a little bit better, because they're probably hard to see from where you are, so I'll let that run through a couple times. So the fact that the biophotons in our system, our connection to light, which connects us to the water in our body, is hexagonal in this process. And we're going to see some other connections as well. So this is, I should have said too, this is structured water. And I will make the mention because hexahedron 999 structured water, and what it is hexahedron999.com is where this comes from. So I like to give credit. This isn't my work. This is just, there's so much amazing work going on these days in this. People say, what do you think about this work or that? I go, I'm glad people are doing it, right? What are the results? Like Harry says, like we got from Trevor, only results count. And Trevor says, well, look, he said, people have been arguing about this stuff for thousands of years. He said, I don't have time to argue. I just get to work and engineer the ether. So here's, anybody here familiar with spectrochrome or Dinshaw's work? Or is this all new? A few people. This stuff's fantastic. I started it by chance back in the 1980s and 90s. His son was my accountant for about 5 years. So I got the full dose of this as a therapeutic and color system. And here we see Goethe's color circle, and how it basically affects the body. So basically, red's like the liver, violet's like the spleen, so red blood cells, white blood cells. That yellow's like motor stimulant, blue's like the chemical stimulant. And in a sense, these are the ethers, like the warmth ether, the life ether, the tone ether, and the light ether. And how they break out on this plane, green and magenta. So green's the physical, magenta's the spiritual, right? This does all the physical functions, and this is like the heart and sexual functions. And I won't go into all the mixing, but I just wanted to show the hex pattern is essential to the full color concept. So this is our body, fundamentally. And that's why this was probably the most profound and useful color healing system of them all, which is why they did this to his equipment. Here we see, under the axe, U.S. Marshals in Wisconsin posed with the remains of a number of Dinshaw's coloring machines seized from the homes of his followers around the country. That's what happens when Dinshaw, the humble servant of suffering mankind, right? He did all this, had people doing it. They started using it in hospitals, and they stopped using drugs. And this is what happens. So, what a shame. But now Dinshaw said that green and magenta are the same wavelength, except they rotate in opposite directions in the ether. So using his tuned glass slides, which I didn't get too deeply into because it's a whole, this lecture could go on for many hours. I'm just trying to give some of the highlights of different things. And happy to talk afterwards, and we can answer more questions. I can even throw a few slides up on screen to help with questions if anybody has any. So here's the red and blue slide, making green, so that's there. So here's the violet and the red slides. I mean, the equipment's not made to go down here, but fundamentally, if it could be made to go, it's just, and we find that the green and magenta actually are the same wavelength, but they just have inverse actions. So Dinshaw was correct. And Goethe said that green, basically, green brings us into physicality, magenta draws us towards spirituality. And I do this one here, so I tie it into water flowing as well. So these are the two spectra we can do, right? The top one's the standard Newtonian, light through a slit. This is, we call it the Goethean light around an object. And this is from Theodor Schwenk's sensitive chaos. So water flowing through a channel with a small opening. So it makes a sinuous pattern with these little vortices in it. So what he does is the same channel, he removes the little gate, and puts an object of the exact same size. So it's basically you're doing the same thing here. What you get is you get the exact same sinuous pattern, but the vortices spin in the opposite direction. So whether this is a direct analogy to the function of light, I think it's at least gives us a good idea of how things might be working with that. So, and they have inverse wave functions to electricity. So, basically, light, so the primal light is the sun, obviously. It's not so yellow these days, but you still get it yellow. So it's a dot, right? It takes 8 minutes to come here, but it's probably like instant, the dot, for a variety of reasons. And then the blue stuff, that's like transverse. That's, it's not really scattering. There's different ways of looking at it, but we can say basically blue, violet, sky dome. That's transverse planar. So that's speed of light. This is instantaneous. So this stuff probably takes about 8 minutes, and this takes longer. So this fades out, which is why for stars we can only see the dots. But then electricity, like magnetism, like magnetic coils, magnetic discharge is on the reddish side, and magnetism fills space. Whereas electricity, right, capacitive discharges are more bluish. And that's like counter space, it goes inside. And that's what Tesla was doing, right? If you look at Tesla's patents, he was mostly working with circuit controllers because he's trying to make and break the rapid discharges out of capacitors to basically invert what was happening with electromagnetism into the faster than light, the magnetodielectricity that he was doing, is longitudinal. So we get the direct analogy between light and electricity structures. So in here, right, if we bring magnetic and electricity together one way, we get the transverse electromagnetism. That's present use, this stuff here. Retarded transverse, slower than light. We do it Tesla's way, we get electricity, the longitudinal magnetodielectric waves, Tesla's electricity, so extraluminal. So that's what starlight is. When you look up at stars, stars are basically instant, right? It didn't take any light years. There's no photons flinging through space or anything. It's like in the double slit experiment. When do they get the particles? When they put a detector in to make the particle. The detector creates the particle that they're detecting. Just like our atmosphere images the stars and the sun. Back about 87, when I first got into this, I was trying to think, okay, this is really cool, atmospheric color formation. I want to know how it's working. So I called up NASA, and I said, hey, look, I'd like to know what the dominant spectra of the sun is in outer space, right, in optical wavelengths. Can I get, like, spectrographs? You guys must have this stuff. And I kind of ran into like this whole stonewall. I go, no, what do you want that information for? I'm going, well, I'm doing this research project. I just like really, it's like, I thought it'd be like real easy. You guys public servants, give me some stuff. I pay taxes, even though I didn't want to, but I did at the time. And anyway, I moved around to a couple things. I first called Washington, and then I called a couple other places, and finally I called Johnson Space Center. And I got this guy, Mike Gentry. He got quite interested. He's going, no, it's interesting. No, there are. He goes, I never thought of that. I'm going, well, give me some white light photo of the sun. We don't have any. What white light photos do you have in space? White light photos of the astronauts or coronagraphs, where something's blocking and the light's reflected down, right? The old coronagraphs, because now they're digital, right? It was basically coming down a polished steel tube. So it's a reflection. Reflecting, sun reflecting off astronauts and things. Even I'm not even sure all of them were up there, but some of them were for sure. And anyway, I said, well, how about photos of stars? No, we don't have any photos of stars. I'm going, come on, Skylab, you guys were doing experiments? Yeah, but they were doing them in like ultraviolet, extreme ultraviolet wavelengths. So anyway, they sent me all this stuff, extreme ultraviolet, that's what all the pictures of the sun is in space, out above the optical wavelength emission bands. There was like nothing. And he put me in touch with this photographer that worked for NASA for like 25 years at that time, and he said, yeah, it was weird when they first went up, John Glenn, Alan Shepard, he said, space was black. He said it was a bit of a puzzle. He said, so they started working with specialized diffraction gratings, and they started being able to see like higher order, stars, the brighter stars and things. He said, because but I don't know where that project went. He said everything was so compartmentalized. That was just the very beginning. Gemini missions. So anyway, in my thoroughness, I call up the Solar Naval Research Laboratory, got the head of the project, and I'm going, what's this thing about you can't see the stars in space? And he's going, where'd you get that? I'm going, NASA. He's going, no. He goes, somebody's pulling your leg. I said, no, look, this is public relations, Johnson Space Center. And the guy said, well, look, he said, my partner, research partner, John Bartow, he's been up. He was up on the first Challenger and spacewalked and did solar research. He goes, I'll put him on. So he gets John on. John's going, no, look, when you get above the atmosphere, the stars are brighter than they are on Earth, and they don't twinkle. I'm going, well, cool, no thanks. I said, I was just checking this out. He goes, no, I understand. We had a nice little chat. I go, yeah, what was it like in space? Yeah, it was cool. So anyway, I called back my contacts in NASA, and they're going, well, you know, he was a trained observer, and he would have accurately reported what he saw. I said, but the information we've given you is correct. So obviously, by the time these later people are going up, they've got specialized diffraction gratings that are imaging the stars and stuff. So we put a lot of thought and stuff into this back in the borderland days in the 80s and 90s. And we figured that starlight is longitudinal. It's like Tesla's longitudinal electricity. It's not flinging through space everywhere and just happens to be hitting us. It appears where there's like an organic receptor, which happens to be our atmosphere. Or our eyes, right? Well, they said that after a while in space, their eyes would start conditioning and seeing it. So it's an interesting puzzle all along. And now Tesla's work. So what is Tesla? It is inverse. So at the top here we have basically standard radio. Might be easier if I do this like this. I figured out how to do it. Yeah, so here's standard, right? You have your ground, you've got your energy supply as your transformer, which is being modulated by whatever music or voice you're putting out. And the antenna puts it out into space, but it fades away. You go around a bend behind a hill or whatever, or drive too far out of a city, it's gone. Tesla is, right, energy supply goes here. The virtual ground is the antenna. So this is the ground, the virtual ground, and the Earth is the transmitter. Right? So it's scalar, transmitting through the ground. It changes Earth from electrical infinity to an electrical point. The energy is available everywhere without fading or distortion. Okay. So that's the worldwide wireless. Tesla was building this. They were going to have this. We were going to have this stuff over 100 years ago. We wouldn't need to power anything. People say, oh, well, Tesla, he envisioned the cell phone, right? But the cell phone he was envisioned as you could like look into it and transfer your thoughts to anybody anywhere else in the world without power. And then you could get in your diskcraft and go visit them if you wanted without having to gas it up. And he developed the technology for it. That's why he was shut down and we were never able to access any of that. Okay, electricity. So we know what is electricity. There's different sides of electricity. It's healing, it's hurting, like I was talking about Lawrence Edwards, with the tree bud that wasn't changing along with the planetary and the moon because of the big transformer. So we know, and through Arthur Furstenberg's work, The Invisible Rainbow, if anybody's read that, it's a fantastic book on the development of modern diseases concomitant with the development of electronic technologies and broadcast technologies. Totally tied in. The first people with diabetes were like Alexander Graham Bell, and Marconi, Edison, right? The electrical researchers, they're the ones that first started coming down. There was no diabetes before electricity, fundamentally. But then it's the healing side, too. So, there was like the Minkowski multiple wave oscillator, which I did a book on back in the 80s and 90s, which he was using as a cancer cure. Didn't put him in very good position with the authorities. But his original equipment worked clinically. And then, of course, Royal Rife with his beam tube and his microscope to see it. Now, a lot of people think, well, it's frequency. Well, like, Minkowski was using multiple frequencies. And his thesis was, he was like terrain theory, we can call it. Because he was saying, right, you don't attack the pathogen. He says, you resonate the cells to their proper state and the pathogens disappear. But Rife, right, he's like germ theory, right? He's tuning in the germ and zapping it with a frequency. But if you look at the frequencies like the BX virus, which Well, it wasn't a virus because he couldn't see that far into the spectrum. It was probably like a rod bacilli in the pleomorphic stage of what happens within the blood. So anyway, when he would get to the frequency that would kill that, right? He was curing cancer in people and mice. It's very well recorded. So my thesis is it wasn't the frequency zapping the thing wasn't the effect. The thing was the plasma tube and all the other greater generation of what was happening around it was having a more Lakhovsky-like effect on it. But it was more kind of going in certain ranges of things rather than the broadband of Lakhovsky. So I've dreamed of actually combining these technologies, and we're doing some work in that direction. So we've been through with Juan Schlosser, as I've mentioned a few times here. This is some of the basic antennas we're working with to find biological effects. And this down here in the lower right, this is independent testing by Don Paris, who they call the quantum doctor. So this is heart rate variability monitor, just one of many tests. So if somebody has their cell phone on them without the antenna, we put the antenna on the phone and retest them, and their energy level jumps to that phase. There's a lot of tests like this available online, and I've got more pictures. Okay, log periodic and fractal antennas. I used to kind of call them both the same, but I've realized they weren't, so just to clarify. So fractal antennas is like a fern. Oh, this fern here is almost fractal and log periodic. These are log periodic, logarithmic, basically. So this is logarithmic. These aren't really fractal. Although in our sense, some of the original antennas we did that Eric Dollar designed were only log periodic, but these are log periodic and fractal, the way we've changed the geometries on them. And these are just log spiral. So these are different types of antennas that work with natural energies. And of course, insects use them. And those are all in the microwave range that we're building all this incredible technology around so we can communicate. And all the insects on the planet are dying. I wonder why, with all their little antennae. So this is Veda Austin. I gave her one of our antennas some years back as a gift. And so I didn't even expect her to do anything. I was just like, hey, she's a friend from New Zealand. I ran into her at a conference, and I said, hey, here's one of our antennas as a gift. So anyway, this is Auckland tap water, just north of Auckland, New Zealand, with her crystallography. This is tap water after sitting on a bioarc disk for 1 minute. So this is what one of these antennas does to water after 1 minute. I was shocked myself. I had no idea that they reacted that well. Because we always did just kinesiology with them, and we were making these and passing them out for people to test. And that's how Don Paris ended up testing them independently. Heart rate variability monitors, and they have a resort in Bali, the Shambhala Oceanside Retreat, and they've got like 40 employees, all these Balinese, and they've had the Balinese come and sit there with their phones and on and off and testing them, which they were greatly entertained by that. So I was always wondering what the mechanism was, but I started realizing through what Vita was doing that it's actually probably the water itself in our system, which is actually the action of these antennas on us. So water is a fractal antenna. So water's molecular structure allows dynamic hydrogen bond networks enabling formation of coherent domains and molecular structures. Provides a basis for storing and transmitting information and energy. So as a liquid crystal, water is highly responsive to electromagnetic fields, especially sensitive to very low frequency EMF. Its quasi-crystalline structure provides fractal geometry for wide band interactions. This is why I'm showing those things like where, blood coagulation, all of that, all these different minerals, everything's reacting to the cosmos, when it's in a liquid state. Well, this is why, because water is a fractal antenna. It's actually helping pick all of this stuff up. So modifying water's hydrogen bond network tunes its EM coupling, similar to fractal antennas, which is why structured water helps our cells in our bodies. So water's EM interaction influence aqueous reactions, transducing EM information to chemical and physical processes. So structured water around biomolecules act as electromagnetic antennas, storing and communicating biological information. So basically, it's the water in our system which is doing that. Anyway, DNA harmonizer. Here's a new antenna system we've been working with. We call it DNA harmonizer. So basically there's two spirals, and I'm not sure why one of them has disappeared, but you can see them both overlapping on the bottom. And the way they overlap cause a phyllotaxis, which is resonant with the DNA structure. So we call this a DNA harmonizer. And this is an antenna we plan on using in our Rife-Lakhovsky hybrid technology. So basically, it's creating a scalar field with radiative characteristics that project the same sacred spiral geometry, both inwardly and outwardly, to infinity. So, yeah, basically, it's for biological systems. This is where we've been going with our antenna systems. Because sacred geometry and DNA, that's why, because these are sacred geometry, the DNA is sacred geometry. So DNA structure, it exhibits golden ratio, pentagonal, and hexagonal patterns. Double helix shaped mirrors spirals found in sacred geometry, and DNA is a biological manifestation of sacred geometric principles. And the DNA is a fractal antenna, right? As we know, self-similar structure resembles a fractal antenna. So basically, that's what makes it reactive to EMFs with the biological effects. So we see that, and then we see on the bottom some of the bioarchitecture designs, which are based on DNA structure. So that plants, animals, and humans inside the structures. So, why do we react to sacred geometry? Well, we are sacred geometry. Mammalian skull dimensions in the golden ratio. So it's in our skull shapes and elsewhere all through our body. I just thought it was great because the skull is kind of where we think we're thinking out of. And a golden ratio of the heart, like Harry was showing all the vortexian work, and the heart's not a pump. But, right, it's all golden ratio as well. It's beating in our heart. Both the structure and the beating of it is all golden ratio. So they ubiquitously exist in every manifestation of life. They are life. And the golden ratio is the orgone energy of Wilhelm Reich, so here's preliminary study of effects of Reich's orgone accumulator on oat seeds sprouting and the structure of water. So basically, sprouted seeds controls and orgone charged seeds inside an orgone accumulator. They grow better, we know that. But then we can show the relationship here with our antennas. We get the exact same effects. This is like a 15-inch antenna. So these were both started at the same time, and you can see this is one of numerous experiments that show that the golden ratio, sacred geometry, and orgone life energy, which is the ether, the chemical tone ether, they're the same thing, basically. That's why these technologies work, why they structure water. So I wanted to show this one too. Here's another one that Veda did. Before and after direct exposure to a Wi-Fi router. So here's spring water. You can see the beautiful patterns in it. Again, New Zealand spring water. Spring water after 1 minute exposure to Wi-Fi. It looks like the tap water we showed earlier. Here's spring water after 1 minute exposure to Wi-Fi while sitting on top of a bioarc disk. So it's not as perfect as that, but you can see that the patterns are coming back in and it's recrystallizing. It's not as jumbled. So we know that they're having these effects. You shouldn't be around any of the Wi-Fi or anything, but we can't help it, so we are. But we know that these. So water, what is water, right? It's like represents the principle of movement and change, right? It's a symbol of life and growth. Flowing aspects of the physical world, as a metaphor, right? Transformative quality, allowing it to dissolve and change substances, medium for life-sustaining substances, connecting to the forces of growth and evolution. It's also a symbol of the soul and the unconscious mind. Reflects the inner spiritual life of the universe. The studying water's properties offers insights into the spiritual forces shaping the physical world. Now, I like this quote from Dr. Masaru Emoto. It could be that the events we experience throughout our lives become memories recorded by water, which remain in our bodies and may be what we call the soul. So water is a living organism. So basically hydrogen and oxygen. So you get hydrogen and oxygen when you take water apart. But when they're together, they're more than hydrogen and oxygen. They're this magic fluid that's basically, if we look at it from the anthroposophical point of view, right, constructed hydrogen's levity force. Remember in the first part, Galileo, the Accademia del Cimento, the contra levitate maxim. You're not allowed to talk about levity. But levity exists around us. Levity is what brings us, has us standing up, pulls plants from the ground. It's everywhere. The opposite of Newton's apple falling to the ground. And hydrogen, it's the hottest element, right? Burns, it rises up. Rudolf Hauschka, he named it pyrogen. He said it was improperly named. He says, when you look at a body of water, it's mostly oxygen, right? You see the oxygen in the bluish from that. Anyway, he called oxygen geogen. I don't know, carbon was geogen. I forget his name for oxygen. So that's gravity. You know, it's an oxidizer, right? It reduces things towards the ground. And we know in a flame, right, the oxygen is what converts everything into carbon, so it reduces it to the earth element. So interaction between hydrogen and oxygen, expressing the balance between gravity and levity, creates the fluidity and movement of water. So this is a fundamental aspect of the nature of water. It can be seen as a symbol of the balance between the spiritual and physical aspects of the universe. But here's water's at the galactic center. All right, H2O masers detected near galactic center emit powerful microwave radiation, providing evidence of water molecules in extreme environments. Discovery of water ice in the Milky Way central plasmoid by the James Webb Space Telescope. So there's water everywhere, including in the center of the galaxy and all the way out, the moons. Water masers, a maser is like coherent, which means some sort of energies driving these bands of water. So I'll read this. It's a bit small text, but there's a lot of information on here, and I think this is really good for people to understand. So 99% of the body's molecules are water in a highly structured liquid crystalline state, crucial for cellular function, communication, and information transfer. Structured water acts as a fractal antenna, enabling our complex biological systems. DNA is intimately connected with structured water. DNA is coated in geometrically arranged water attached by hydrogen bonds and has a pillar of structured water through the central column of the helix, influencing DNA shape, stability, and interactions. Healthy DNA is surrounded by highly structured water, while unhealthy DNA has less, which is why structured water is good for you. Crystalline structure of water around DNA and biomolecules is essential, as a proper geometric arrangement allows enhanced information storage and transfer. So specific hydrogen bonding patterns are key to DNA structure and function. The DNA hydration shell is dynamic, not static. It is influenced by the amount and structure of water present, and changes in water structure can alter DNA shape and biological role. So we're truly crystalline water beings. Liquid crystalline water is a medium of life and the interface between energy, consciousness, and physical form. Our health, thoughts, and very being are reflected in our internal waters. And here's the Platonic solids, which we don't need to get into them too deeply, but I just wanted to throw them up because we'll need them on the next slide. Well, I want to mention on the last slide, water exists from the center of the galaxy to the center of our cells. And as we know, there's in the anthropocentric universe, the whole universe is operating as though we're in the center as far as our biological systems. Plants know it. The only thing that separates us from that is the organ of cognition called the modern worldview that the schools instilled in us when we were young, and we have to overcome that to start seeing in these other directions. So yeah, basically you have the cube is earth, the octahedron air, the icosahedron water. Interesting, we're going to see in a second. Tetrahedron fire, and dodecahedron ether. So if we look at Professor Martin Chaplin's research, where they're doing like X-ray and electron diffraction of water molecules, or water clusters. So liquid water contains hydrogen-bonded clusters related to icosahedral structure, clustering. So water molecules geometry begins as interlocking tetrahedrons, right? Fire, because that's the hydrogen bonds, so you can get, that's the fire element. So we have the fire element, then then they join into the icosahedral, which is the water element in the center, and then the pentagonal, which is dodecahedral, which is basically the ether. So we're getting 3 of Aristotle's ethers in water structure. So in water exists a network of bonds extending throughout the entire liquid, which is, in a sense, one large molecule. So whether it's a glass of water in front of you, or a lake, or a river, or the oceans, it functions a body of water, right? It's one molecule because it's all connected throughout. It's not like there's a bunch of little pieces that just happen to be hanging out. And we see down in the corner in these clusters, the clusters move through the water. It's not like they're rigid clusters that clump up and move through the water of molecules. The patterns flow through the water depending on how coherent the water is or how structured. It moves by what Chaplin calls quantum electron exchange, which is a fancy way of saying that the patterns are sort of almost like ghostly through the water and creating these, how would you say it, these stronger patterns. But anyway, Chaplin says, Plato would not have been wrong to connect liquid structure in general to icosahedra as spherical atoms and molecules in the liquid phase prefer icosahedral clustering, right? That's the main one. So that's University of South Bank, London, so we know. And then here's Professor Martin Chaplin's work, which was covered a bit in Harry's speech this morning. The exclusion zone water, right, distinct from solid, liquid, and gas, forms near hydrophilic surfaces, which just means water-loving. But you can get energy out of it, and basically the water in our cells, wherever you get structured water, even surface tension potentially is caused by these hexagonal layers. So on the left here, we see the hexagonal layers. So here's easy water. So basically, hexagonal layers form these special structures which give vibrancy to cells. It's basically organic water, we could say. And what's interesting is the surface of the sun. Pierre-Marie Robitaille, that I mentioned earlier in the no black hole section, what he realized is when he created the highest resolution magnetic resonance imaging equipment, and what he realized when he's making the resonant chambers, that Kirchhoff's law didn't apply, which is like a fundamental of physics in that, which meant that Planck's constant wasn't constant and it wasn't universal. And he started thinking this chain of thought, and he goes, hey, wait a minute. The sun's got black body radiation. It has to be solid. It can't be a gas. So he's done all is detailed, plenty of papers on this. Of course, academia will shun it, but nonetheless, you can find the data and make up your own mind on it. So the surface of the sun is metallic hydrogen, which is hexagonal, which we see that, where have we seen that today? In the bee's eyes and the bee's honey and all through nature. So easy water and the surface of the sun have the same pattern. And like Jerry Pollack was saying, that it's possible that surface tension is caused by infrared radiation from the sun and other causes which might actually make several layers of the easy water, which is what gives the surface tension to it. So let's see, here's a relationship between solar activity and water levels. So on top here we have the Parana River in South America, Parana River stream flow and sunspot numbers, direct correlations. Here we have the Mississippi River flow and solar irradiance, which is the total output of everything, sun and from optical, ultraviolet, X-ray, everything. So that's the total energetic output of the sun graphed against the Mississippi River. Wow, who would have thought that the river rising and falling follows that? Of course, there's probably a lot of other reasons within vegetation, and I've got many other slides in the extension of this talk. And this is Lake Victoria levels and solar activity. So if there's a connection between surface tension, easy water, structured water, the surface of the sun, we're seeing so many connections between what's happening in space and what's happening biologically. This is Theodor Schwenk from his basis of potentization research. So what he was doing here is you know what homeopathic succussion is, right? They take like a substance and put it in water and they shake it. They'll take a drop of that, put it in the next one, and so after 23 dilutions, there's none of the molecule left, Avogadro's number. But what he was doing, he wasn't putting anything in. They're using just purified water. And they're shaking it in the ampule at different times of day, all through the day, right? So a series of identical glass flasks were filled 2/3 up the way with distilled water. Flasks were rhythmically handshaken for a 4-minute period, for 4-minute periods in sequence, one every 2 hours. They did from 1947 to 54. There's a lot of amazing research out on this stuff when you start looking into it. Samples of water so obtained were then used as germinating medium for approximately 50 wheat seeds each. Upon reaching a height of about 10 centimeters, the sprouts were measured and the average length for the different water types was calculated. Results were marked on a graph, which the horizontal axis indicates the time, right, and the vertical average length of the sprouts. So curves show growth noticeably variant to those in unshaken water controls, which they didn't show here because we don't need to. So here's curves from basically 8 p.m. to 6 p.m. waters on St. John's Day, 24th of June, 1953 and 54. So here's a year apart, but they get like virtually identical on the same day. And what I did here, this is just showing 2 days, like a couple months apart, just to show variations. So it's interesting. And down at the bottom, it's probably kind of hard to see this. And this just shows that they were getting effects when the water was shaking during a solar eclipse. Right, they got like the most stunted plants, which is an interesting little thing to think about as well. And so that's homeopathic. So what's a homeopathic effect on structured water? This is from Rustum Roy's work. So the OH bending, so you have H2O, but in there there's OH bonds. And what this is like a laser light shined at water, and they look at the bending, Raman spectroscopy, they call it. So here's standard distilled water. You get this pattern. So here's 3 different homeopathic dilutions showing that the differences that you get. So by this time 30x, and by cm, of course, 100,000, there's none of the substance in the water. All that's been done is the shaking of the water. And what do you get? You're getting reactions in the water. So water's reacting. And this is Rudolf Hauschka and his Nature of Substance. Here he does homeopathic potency curves. So I don't know if you know, but when you do, so if you date different decimal potencies of substances, when they test them on like sprout growth or yeast cultures and things, you can see the different effects at different decimal potencies. Certain substances are stronger at different potencies. They mostly standardize things, so it's quite complex. But it's fascinating research. A lot of the anthroposophists did research on this. You can find. So basically what he did is so here's benzoic acid from benzoic resin. So this is distilled water. That's his control on yeast. So this is benzoic acid. These are the potency curve that came out from the different dilutions up to 30. And this is synthetic benzoic acid. Chemically identical, but made synthetically. So he's showing over here, he's saying he had the subsensible, supersensible, right? We call the subsensible realm of coal tar chemistry, where everything we can get from the plant, right? Oils, colors, honey, food, sugars, starch, cellulose, clothes, everything we can get from the plant, we can make that out of coal tar. So he says coal tar derivatives cannot, in our terms, be etherealized to the being stage by a rhythmical potentizing process. They have forfeited all relationship to cosmic and terrestrial rhythms and do not respond to a rhythmic challenge. Thus, it is fair to say that a basic biological difference exists between natural and synthetic products, despite their chemical identity. The benzoic acid experiments cited show this. So think about that when you're wearing synthetics or have them around, which we're immersed in them these days. What can you do? So this is Schwenk's drop picture method for the quality of water. So basically you have a petri dish. So this is a photograph taken from the top down. So the dish, it's half filled with glycerin, and then the top half is this water sample. So this is good spring, and they put a drop of distilled water down. They take a picture as the water hits. So here's good spring water. And this picture doesn't show up. If you look at this one over on the side, you can see it a little more clearly. But it's actually nice. It's a full picture. And you keep dropping, then get about 30-something pictures. The solution stops reacting if it's good water. So here's moderate tap water. We see there's kind of a boundary there. It's just not as well formed. And in water like that, maybe you 15 to 20 drops, you start losing the pictures. Here's detergent in the water. So if you go out and search for this, there's hundreds of pictures like this on the web. It's a fascinating thing. And I know there's some people here in the UK who are working on getting a portable one that can take it around. And hopefully next year when we do some more of these talks, we'll actually be able to demonstrate these in real life and not just show you pictures. And Dr. Emoto, we've all seen this before, but I left this in because I wanted to read this quote. I just loved his philosophy on water. Water has a memory and carries with it our thoughts and prayers. As you yourself are water, no matter where you are, your prayers will be carried to the rest of the world, and as we know, to the center of the galaxy, which we're connected with, as we know through Picardi's experiments, where he got the least reaction when Earth was pointing directly towards the galactic center. So here's Vita's work, which we know of, the crystallization, basically the ice response. But I wanted to put this in because I think this is really important. As I said, she's one of the greatest researchers of our modern day, and this is one of the things she's discovered in the water and her development of the hydroglyphs. But anyway, in this Chandogya Upanishad, when we drink water, it becomes divided in 3 parts. The grossest part of it becomes urine. That which is less gross becomes blood, and the finest part becomes prana, the vital force. So obviously, the better the water we drink, knowing from Schwenk's picture, we're going to be getting this vitality, which they can't test. The tap water and the spring water is going to show you the same chemical test, but the qualitative results are going to show you vast differences, and the body reacts to that. The secondary qualities, as we can call them. So, as Vita pointed out, the passage from the Chandogya Upanishad is in alignment with the way in which water freezes in 3 stages. First freeze is the first stage. That's where the water is taken out of the freezer. There's liquid on top and ice underneath. Drain the liquid water away and photograph the remaining ice. That's her technique. First freeze has virtually no impurities. It's mostly 4th phase water, very clear, sometimes silvery, and emits light, of which I've captured in a few rare photos. It displays the most complex patterns. This subtle stage is like prana, spirit, or life force energy. Second freeze is a secondary layer of ice which forms above the first. Between them is liquid water. Second freeze has its own patterns which are secondary to the first. It has more density, which is akin to blood. Hovers over the first layer, offering its own information but hiding the original message. The third freeze is when the liquid water is in the middle freezes. Water is a solid when it has gone through all 3 phases. The third freeze holds the majority of total dissolved solids, salts, and minerals. And when it freezes, it darkens the look of the ice. This is like urine. All 3 exist within the solid form of ice. Secrets to life are in the subtleties, Vita. But anyway, I went and looked up that Chandogya Upanishad, right, to see what else is. That was actually really cool. There's some nice stuff in there. But the passage before that, when we eat food, it divides itself into 3 parts. The grossest part of it becomes excreta. That which is less gross becomes our flesh, and the finest part becomes our mind. So obviously, the better the food we eat, the healthier we're going to be. And energy in water, this is Kelvin's thunderstorm. And this is basically very simple setup. I've done this experiment many times, and I need to get it set up. Maybe Harry, you could probably set one of these up. It's not hard to do. So you have metal tubes, or you do it with like metal coils, or a copper plate with a hole in it. It's not that hard to do. And it goes into a bucket, either metal bucket or we just have like a copper plate in there, and we had copper plates with holes in. This side's connected to this side's connected to this side. As soon as the stream of water starts coming through, it starts coming up. Schauberger called this the water thread experiment, but basically, they'll light a fluorescent bulb. You can get quite a shock off of this. And what we want to experiment with, we want to get a water lab going in Bali, doing some of these, and see what the effect is, of structured water, run water through different tests and different waters, and see what sort of voltage we can get and how high, the different qualitative things. So these are all aspects of research. And at some point in my research, I came across this: the U.S. Navy created a device which turns a jet of seawater into an impromptu liquid antenna, creating a powerful high-frequency broadcast tower for ships, emergency situations, and easy transportation. Depending on the height of the stream of water, you can get UHF, VHF, and HF broadcasts, all from the same jet of H2O. You can even set up multiple jets of water at different heights to broadcast on different bands simultaneously. That's like perfect for submarines. They come up, they want to connect in and do some, they can put their, as long as they're doing the broadcasting, just turn the jets off. But then, when I saw this, I was thinking, whale spouts. I'm thinking, and they're all different. So these are like different frequency bands. So at first I thought communication, well, maybe, but they communicate underwater with their songs, which used to go around the world until humans started putting, technology in the water and disrupting them. So maybe when they're blowing these, maybe they're sensing something in the magnetic field of the Earth or subtle energy. I don't know, but it's certainly, I believe there's more to it than it just blowing out water. And the fact that all the different types of whales all have different spouts shows that there's some different connection happening. Or maybe they're blessing us and we haven't accepted it enough. And this is structured water. So this is crystal blue. This is our friend Robert Pascoe, his company. And there's a number of companies that make devices like this. So this is basically a tube filled with spheres, big marbles, if we say. They make theirs using special charged rare earths and things. And the water flows through it. And Jerry Pollack at the Water Lab in Washington, he's shown that water flowing through here creates easy water. So we know that for sure. But crystal blue, they've done a lot of experiments. This is from like the Agricultural University at Sri Lanka. So they take bore water, they split it up between two fields. So control is where it's just straight out of the ground, and the other is through structured water. So here's well water before structuring, well water after structuring. This is gas discharge visualization, Korotkov's device, which is like a enhanced Kirlian photography. And rainwater before structuring, rainwater after structuring. So we know there's energy, but it's actually increased by the structuring in there. And here's the device we're working with, what we call the biovortexer. Crystal blue one I showed you, that's a forced vortex. It's a mechanical vortex. Most units on the market are, because basically that's how they work, right? You need something to run the water through to give you the vortex, which works fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But nature herself creates basically self-sustaining vortex. So this is the first prototype we did of our unit a few years ago, and just so we could watch the flow through. And we use path curve geometry. We're using the geometry that we got from cosmological botany, because this is the archetypal form of nature herself. The plants react to it. This is what water does in the streams. So this is basically Schauberger's log flume turned into a tube using path curve geometry. And the modern units, these slides are, this screen's kind of bad. But if you look over at the screen on the right, you can see a little bit better. These are basically silver-plated copper cores in the middle. So what you're seeing on screen, which was basically a clear plastic 3D print, but the actual ones we're building are silver-plated copper, then coated with layers of special minerals with bioepoxy. So it's totally charged, and so basically it's advanced vortex system. So we've got both the mechanical vortex coming in at the start, but then we have a resonant chamber to allow it to, self-organizing vortex, and then on the way out, then it flows around an egg coming back down to a point. So it's all, basically, we just started really getting to the point where we're getting these out to people and doing testing It's at a nascent stage. We know they work very well from our own tests, but I have people like in the States, they're going, where's the pressure testing? We need the stuff from the lab and all that. So, and they cost a lot to build. Each of those core sections is very expensive, and you cast one off at a jewelry company in Bali. So by next year, we hope to have these more in consumer mode. But I just want to show you the research that's going on in it. That for all these ideas we're talking about, there's a practical application to them. Here's China's Three Gorges Dam, an environmental catastrophe. I remember when I first heard that they were going to do this in like late 80s, early 90s, I was going, oh no, I can't believe these guys are going to, that's insane. You can't be putting these things, especially a river like the Yangtze Kiang, right? It just controls the weather for so much of Asia. So sure enough, Three Gorges Dam affects regional precipitation. Has the Three Gorges Dam created Chinese drought zone? When it comes to environmental change, the implementation of the Three Gorges Dam and reservoir is the great granddaddy of all changes. Victor Schauberger warned us. He said, present-day science is following a wrong and dangerous path. First and foremost, it concerns the treatment of water, the principal agent of life. The existing methods of water control, power stations and forestry, are ruining water, the earth's blood. It becomes diseased and so affects all its surroundings. Instead of progress, the future promises catastrophe. And here they're busy manufacturing catastrophe because now they're getting like crazy floods. Well, why are they doing that? Well, because they were creating a drought zone. The unnatural approach. China to build rainmaking machine on Tibetan Plateau. And they've got like over 40,000 of these now up on the Tibetan Plateau, high-tech silver iodide jets spewing silver iodide into the air to basically make it rain, because they want to control all the rivers in Asia, and they're putting dams up along. It's basically a control function. But it's just horrible what they're doing to the environment with this. So cutting-edge defense technology. So space scientists designed the furnaces using cutting-edge military rocket engine technology to safely and efficiently burn the high-density solid fuel in the oxygen-scarce environment at an altitude of over 5,000 meters. So, yes, they're monitoring it with satellites. So this is going on every day. And, of course, they're getting big rains. They've been worried about what might happen to the, too much rain comes down behind the Three Gorges. But it shows the unnatural approach. And meanwhile, there's much more benign ways of doing it. Life energy, sacred geometric connection. You've seen Harry's work on that. That's why we're all here, because of the work he's doing with this and others. But I'll start with Wilhelm Reich's Cloudbuster, which was basically long tubes connected into, water ground, flowing water or deep ground. Trevor Constable actually started out working with those, and he actually started radionic tuning it and doing different lengths. But then he started thinking, well, water, so he started making resonant tubes. With the inner circumference to length was golden ratio. They experimented with different ones. They found that one worked quite well. And so you trickle water down through it. And I've worked with these, and you set up a bank of them, like 6 of them or something, with a little bit of water trickling down. Within like 10, 20 minutes, you get cloud banks building in the sky straight up on a clear day. I've done this many times. So Trevor was doing these on ship, right, because he was a radio officer chief radio officer for Matson Lines, right, and he was on their flagship where he was able to do a couple decades of experiments, which we recorded. Here's a book I did with Trevor in 1994, Loom of the Future, the weather engineering work of Trevor James Constable. So that's the development and use of it and showing, the effects of it. The trials and tribulations of trying to birth a new technology amongst, as Trevor said, a world destined to send itself to hell. So basically what he found is, so he was using the water on the ship. Right, he had these things set up, and the Commodore would let him do the experiment. And one day he said, "You're a smart guy. Figure out how to do this without water." So Trevor took that as a order that he couldn't use water anymore. So he thought, okay, so he started using geometric orgone accumulators. And that's what these are. So basically, these are resonant tubes, geometric accumulators. So rather than connecting to ground, he connected to the ethers. And Trevor was the one that birthed me into the etheric sciences. He told me, he goes, ever read Steiner? I'm going, nah, I wasn't really into Christian mystics. He's going, no, you missed the point. He said, read the scientific work, which I did, which is how I got into the light and color and everything. So there's Trevor. He was wonderful. These were the MT bazookas that he used. I've used those as well. So these are different shipboard things. You see, he made a lot of different things. There wasn't just one type. But at the end, he found that these particular tubes, especially in airborne, worked very well and did a lot of tests. These units here, the spiders, the rotating units, or he called me one day from Hawaii when he got there, because he basically lived between LA and Hawaii on the ship. And he called me from Hawaii. He said, well, because they made the first spider and they were testing it down in the machine room. And they were running it, and he came up on deck because they're coming into the port in Honolulu. And basically, they made it rain. The thing is, inside the ship, with all the metal and the plate glass steel and everything, the geometry of this affected the ether so as though the plane was invisible. The ship was invisible. And the same with this. Look at these tubes. Basically, it's a plastic tube covered with metal, right? And what's an airplane? Yeah, it's just basically plastic and metal. So you strap a tube, and they've actually, that affects the weather. We've got video and all sorts of records of this. And Trevor, they've even done it inside, not even strapping it outside, but doing it inside. It still works inside. Well, so you're affecting the ether, you're affecting the substratum. We're talking earlier about, like the sun, right? Solar activity affecting radioactive decay rates, even when they're inside Faraday cages. So this stuff's operating even when it's inside metal and around things. So there's a lot to learn out of this. It's a fantastic field, and always thankful for Trevor for plowing me into Steiner, as he put it. So here's China again. China builds world's biggest air purifier, and it seems to be working, right? So they built this giant fan, which comes down and blows through a couple acres of greenhouses. And that's it, right? It's just a fan blowing through greenhouses. So they're saying, it produced more than 10 million cubic meters of clean air a day since its launch. So it covers an area 10 square kilometers, 3.86 square miles. This whole giant thing, they're hailing it, yay! So let's get Trevor's work here. So here's the spider units he developed. So this was Operation Clincher in 1990. So he filed this, National Oceanic and Atmospheric. The operations on land he would always file. So basically, here's the purpose of projects. Record seasonal reduction of smog, 1990, Southern California. So he filed this 6 April 1990, and basically running from May to September. Primary energy vortex generating units, spider type. No chemicals or electromagnetic radiation employed or emitted. Techniques are biogeometric and proprietary. 6 to 9 spider units will be operated from Southern California bases, 1 May to 31 October. Operational goal is to produce drastic reduction of air pollution. Minimum goal, 15% reduction under 1989. So this is the entire LA basin, right? The Chinese fan, that does, like 4 square miles. What does this do, right? 1990 smog season, cleanest air on record. So these are basically different operations that Trevor did. So here's Operation Clincher. That was the seasonal reduction. Victor, this was 86. This was actually rain. This was Operation Clincher. That was a rain operation. But he was monitoring the smog, and he realized he's reducing the smog. So that's when he started. They didn't operate here. This is control, doing nothing this year. And then breakthrough to show it worked, and then Clincher, because he figured it out. So basically, you can reduce smog, you can clean the city, just little rotating things. You don't need big fans blowing through greenhouses. And here's a book I did with Trevor, Operations Reports. So basically, it covers a lot of what we did at Borderland. You know, he's always publishing his work in the Borderland Journal and subsequent updates and stuff. So these are all available in download PDFs on archive.org. Here's impact of modern architecture on urban weather. We're all engineering the weather without even knowing it, right? Building cities, measuring the impact of a city's building on the weather. The shape of cities shapes the weather. A study of how tall buildings influence climatic factors and the need to create a different microclimate in a district. Effect of high-rise buildings on the surrounding thermal environment. Of course, so that's the problem. Tall buildings and dense cityscapes degrade the surrounding thermal environment through turbulence, uneven heating, and stagnant air. Strategic combinations of building heights, street widths, green spaces, and high albedo surfaces can help mitigate these effects and even generate localized cooling. What's the solution? Regenerative bioarchitecture offers a paradigm shift, designing buildings in harmony with natural surroundings and employing innovative biotechnologies to promote healing for humans and nature. I was actually approached by a giant Chinese firm that builds big skyscrapers. One of the people was interested, had heard about some of the etheric work, and wanted to know if we could do something. And we said, absolutely, sure. I gave him a whole proposal, scientific papers, Trevor's work, all that. I said, yeah, look, we can work with your designers. We can implement this technology into the tops of these tall buildings you're doing, which will certainly help ameliorate the effects on the environment, which would be a good thing for China with all the big building going on. They never got back, but a friend of the person that connected us through told me, I said, yeah, I never heard back on that. He said, yeah, it didn't get past the army of accountants. He said they couldn't see any profit in it, so they weren't going to put any money into it. But we can only try. Eventually, hopefully these things will happen. So here's what we're doing. Regenerative architecture. By designing structures from comprehension of the intrinsic energetic aspect pervading nature, we naturally re-enter into a regenerative symbiotic relationship with our environment. This reveals the ultimate purpose of bioarchitecture. So this was designed for a center in Oregon, which hasn't been built yet. One of many buildings, so these are computer renderings from Juan. These are his designs. This is a computer rendering, but actually it has been built. These have all been built, and the pool is in. This is at Nuuanu City on the west coast of Bali. So benefits of bioarchitecture. Structural design create beneficial field effects on health of living organisms, restores harmony between built environment and natural world, improves urban microclimates and thermal comfort, enhances air quality, human health and well-being, contributes to planetary healing and regeneration. So I looked at what Trevor was doing, and I thought, well, so weather guns, right? He was a military historian. If you go through Illumine the Future, we actually have a whole section on that. And he wrote books on aviation pilots of the Second World War and stuff, right? And even Operation Clincher, one of the spider bases was Curtis LeMay. General bombs away LeMay, the guy who started Strategic Air Command. Trevor was hanging out with guys like that. And I thought, well, it's a great introduction to the work, and it's wonderful work, and it's necessary that we're doing this and learning as we go through. But I thought we need to evolve this. Like Trevor always said, I'm just showing you guys that there's a science behind this. There's more to it. You guys figure this out. So I thought, how can we basically extend this technology? So what we're putting into bioarchitecture is Trevor's technology. So these buildings are being built to harmonize the atmosphere. And this building is being built, this is a Jain temple being built at Pune, India right now. This is Juan's design. We work with with the Vastu architect Mayank there. And he came to us for a design. So this is it's being built now. So this is path curve geometry. This is, again, the path curve. So that's basically what we see as the way to move. Although There's a number of different natural patterns. This is just something that intrigues us because it's what plants work on. So fundamentally, this is a big, basically, we'll call it a translator, right? Sky antenna, earth antenna. It's called Guru Charan Tirth. There's dielectric capacitor harvesting potential difference between sky and the earth. And this gives you an idea of the size of it. And what's interesting is Mayank told me that basically, after they've been setting up all of these things, this is in April, right? But he told me just about a week or two before we flew over here, he said that what they've been noticing now is they're putting up all these petals, they're noticing atmospheric changes overhead, and they're getting light drizzles coming down over the site. So it's not that it's a rain-making machine. What it does is it's sort of like if you do orgone, therapeutic massage to relieve characterological blocks in your system, you get these incredible tingling, right, as the orgone starts flowing and stuff. That's basically what this is doing, right? It's not going to make it rain all the time over it. It's going to balance the biosphere. And they want to build a number of these around India, right? They came to us because they said they wanted to do a new temple impulse. And it's kind of funny that they came to us to do it. But anyway, the first one is going up, and we'll learn more. So I don't know if you're familiar with basalt rebar, which is much better than metal, right? They do the fiber and do it with special epoxies, and it's actually stronger than steel. So they're trying to use a lot of that, but they have to use some steel for structural purposes, right? The engineers are trying to avoid it, but a certain amount. And the sections of that, so all the metal is actually going to be connected around as one thing, and then there's ground, so they're going to be like the two plates of a capacitor. So they're using concrete, but they're using, I actually helped them with the research to find ways of using specialized concrete to be a more living concrete, like the old Roman concrete. So they're trying to use the most specialized materials they can. And Mayank, he's a very well-known Vastu architect in India. So he specializes in using different materials and bioenergetics. It's on a power spot. So it's going to be amazing. And what's interesting is it's the same harmonic as our antennas, right? It's the same technology. We do the same thing everywhere. That's our science. And the antennas and this and our water structure units are all tuned to the sacred cubit, which is a fraction of the polar radius of the Earth, which is used in the Great Pyramid. So we're tuning all of our technology to that. So here's path-curve dome fractal geometry. It's not, it comes out better on that other screen over there. So every dome represents the progress of the opening of the petals moving towards our outer layers. And of course, there'll be sacred geometric harmonics. So here, sacred science. Our physical material world is to precipitate higher forms and energies. We experience in nature's living processes the geometries and intuitions which emanate from this refined creative realm. So again, this was for the Oregon Center, which hasn't been built. I hope they do build this because I love this. The pine cone, this is the pineal temple. So the ethers, right? Let's, okay. Yeah, I don't know why my backgrounds want to flash on here. But anyway, here we go, the four ethers. So this is the refined realm. So basically what Trevor used, the orgone, is he called it the chemical or tone ether, right? Because the structure affects the water in the atmosphere. And the chemical ether is the underlying field which breathes in and out through the day. At dawn it starts coming out and then goes up and kind of chaoticizes through the atmosphere. It gets sucked back in at dusk and it's quiescent in the earth at night. And that's why you have the maximum humidity and dew points at dawn and dusk. And these are this all comes from Steiner's work, like the warmth. So there's one ether that kind of has four differentiated actions on our plane, which is just below, the third hierarchy and coming down into, biological form. So basically warmth, light, tone, chemical. Warmth, impulse creating, binding, biological force. Light makes things visible. It's an upright force in plants and humans, the levity force. Right? Tone chemical harmonizes structures, development of phenomena in the life ether, unifies objects and its environment. And if we compare them to the elements, so on the right are the elements, the tattvas from Vedic sciences, Prithvi, Apas, Vayu, Tejas. So I just want to use those symbols. They're like from the past, and I think of Steiner's symbols. These come from Günter Vaxmuth's etheric formative forces in cosmos, earth, and man. I've just sort of modified them into symbol form. So these symbols, they help us put our consciousness into the state to understand these. Like there's a thing called the tattva vision. Well, you'll say you'll stare at like a yellow square for a while, and then look at a white surface, and you see the opposite. But by going back and forth, they say it's like a mystical practice that it puts you into that state of understanding that element more. So I extended that from the tattvas into this, and these are actually the 4 lower chakras as well. The rainbow chakras were invented in 1967 by Christopher Hill's in Nuclear Evolution book. So the Muladhara is yellow square with 3 red petals, but the Svadhisthana is the crescent, silver crescent. The Manipura was the fire pointed down. And Anahata, which in the Vedic sciences, this has 6-pointed star in the middle of it, and that's the air. The 6-point star is the Goethean color circle, right, the archetypal heart chakra of the Buddha, right, the Buddha's rainbow heart. And these are just how the ethers work. So on the left is idealized ethers on the planet. Here, basically, red warmth ethers out on the outside. Yellow light ether dominates inner atmosphere. Here's oceanic band and kind of the earth itself, right, for the life ether. But then during the day, right, the chemical ether comes up. These get pushed down by the sun. And as they chaoticize, they form like the green band, which is the vegetative band. So it's just another way. This comes from Milner and Stewart's Loom of Creation. So we're not going to go deep into it, but I just want to give a couple of pictures to give an idea of how the ethers function. And think about flame, points up, right? Because it's trying to go back up, right? It's levity force. But a flame in the thermosphere no longer points up because it's reached the levity point. So on the Earth, the gravity point is in the Earth and the levity point's up above, which in the local environment, that's what pulls plants out of the ground. Like this light ether is suctional. Plants just don't grow because they grow up, right? And only the apple falls. Like they say, well, what if Newton asked, how did that tree get there? In the super sensible, when we raise our consciousness by meditating on these, like the plant growth experiments and the light ethers, you start understanding, you create new organs of cognition that allow comprehension of these. You can't read it on a meter, but you can understand it when you look at it. So like when I looked at this, I knew exactly what it was. And one way to think of it too is, again, the tattvas on the left and the ethers on the right. So like a tree's rooted in the earth, right? It's rooted in the elements, and it's formed of elements. But the ethers flow through it. But the ethers are subject to cosmic conditions, day and night, seasons, all of that. So they're mobile, right? They move with the wind, so there's a mobility to the plant as well. So we can think of that in that sense, right? Our physicality is like the elemental structure, but the higher force, the spirit that works through us, is the etheric forces. So they work together as a formative process. And one way to think of that is the dawn chorus. So there's this dawn chorus. It's a natural phenomenon that occurs in the early morning hours just before sunrise. So this is in the VLF spectrogram of electromagnetic chorus. So basically, just for the dawn, I get this on VLF, it's caused by the interaction of the solar wind with the Earth's magnetosphere. With the proper radio equipment, dawn chorus can be converted to sounds that resemble birds' dawn chorus. If you ever heard the dawn chorus, it's amazing, right? I lived in New Zealand, the bellbirds. It was the first time I heard it. I was like, what in the world? It's just so incredibly loud. And it's just such a pleasure to wake up in the morning and hear them going. But the ethers are doing it, right? The sun's making this do it. So are the birds part of the expression of that? Because fish recorded singing dawn chorus on reefs just like birds. So down in the watery realm, so this is the light realm, here's the watery realm, they're doing it, and it's interesting just to kind of extend that concept. Crustaceans found to fertilize seaweed like bees pollinate plants. So there's all these different layers of activity that are happening, and by conceiving them, it allows us to think outside our normal discursive consciousness. So say that brings us down to the beginning, right? We're just like learning these things and trying to figure them out. So we kind of have these 4 different sapiens within us, right? The geosapiens, right? Our physicality, grounds us to our physical structure. The hydrosapiens, we know we're saturated with water, right? We've got billions of water molecules around each DNA with a structured water pillar right through the center of each DNA, and it's reacting to everything around us, our moods, our friends, the food we eat, what the cosmos is doing, where we're at on the orbit, what's happening at the galactic center, because there's a lot happening there we didn't even get into. The aerosapiens, right? Because we breathe, right? We interact with the plants, right? We breathe out the carbon dioxide. They take that, give us oxygen. So aerosapiens, we're symbiotic with the plant world in that sense. And then the electrosapiens or plasmosapiens, right? Our whole electrical sense and connection to all the forces and electricity and energies of the planet. So bringing those all together, I think of as homo luminous, right? It's the overarching essence of our being. And hopefully we're evolving to. So anyway, thank you for your time. I hope that was entertaining.